Notre Dame fans, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. We are officially kicking off Marshall Week today, folks. We will have some references, obviously, to the past game because you always have to learn from the past as you prepare for the next. And that's going to be part of what we do today. So our show today is going to really have three main parts. The beginning, we're going to kind of look at let's talk Notre Dame first, right? And Ryan and I are going to, we've broken down the film from last week. We've also started prep work for Marshall. And there's some areas that Notre Dame didn't play well on Saturday against the Buckeyes that are going to have to play well against Marshall on Saturday if they're going to handle business the way that they need to handle business on Saturday. And so we're going to look at Notre Dame first and just the things we would be focusing on if we were coaches, and then as analysts, what we need to see from Notre Dame on Saturday. And then we'll do an intro to Marshall. We're going to kind of talk about, their personnel. We're going to talk about their scheme, their coach. His Charles Huff is the head coach of Marshall. He's a name that Notre Dame fans should be somewhat familiar with because he was someone that Notre Dame interviewed for the running backs coach position back in 2019 before they ended up hiring Lance Taylor because Charles Huff chose to go to Bama. He was there for, I believe, a year before Marshall hired him as their head coach. Very good football coach. Really great reputation as a running backs coach and recruiter, not just as a recruiter, but also as a really good running backs coach. So this is a guy that can coach. Had a good first couple years at Marshall, especially, this will be year 2, right? So he was at Alabama for 19 and 20.
Yep.
And then he's been at Marshall. This is his second year. So they went to a bowl game last year, went 7-6 last season. And Ryan, as we'll get into it, but this is a team that if you want to say what's an equivalent, this is not Bowling Green in New Mexico, folks. No. This, in my opinion, this is a team they're better than what Toledo was last year. They are. They have better athletes. They have more size. And they're also coached well, as Toledo was. That's the one thing about Toledo last year. Toledo was coached very well last year.
Yes. Yep.
They played above their talent level, and Notre Dame played down to them. Marshall's the kind of team that can beat you if you play like you did against Toledo last year because they're better than Toledo. But this is also still a team that Notre Dame should handle, if we're being honest. Again, what do we do on this show? We walk and chew gum at the same time. We can say, hey, look, this is not a team you can just sleepwalk through. This isn't Ball State. It's not Miami, Ohio. It's a good football team for that level. Mm-hmm. But it's also a team that when you have Notre Dame's talent, if you're coached well and you're a team that's got good leadership, this should not be a competitive game either, at least not for 4 quarters. And so that's where Notre Dame has to make their improvements, Ryan.
Brian, I mean, for me, I was kind of working through this in my head earlier after I watched, the full game of Marshall last week where they played Norfolk State. And I'll say this, the perception from Notre Dame fans are going to be that Notre Dame should win 50-0, right? Mm-hmm. The reality is that Notre Dame maybe should win 50-0. Like, they are a better football team than Marshall. There's no doubt. The things that I'm looking forward to and things that I want to be very candid about is that I was very impressed with Marshall on film. And I know it was just Norfolk State, FCS team. I get it. I understand. But they have a couple football players we're going to talk about later that are good players. One is in particular that I was like, that kid should be playing Power 5 football somewhere and would be a contributing player on Power 5 that we'll talk about a little bit, right?
And some have. Yeah. I mean, Kalen LeBourne, their starting running backs, a kid who's a former top 100 recruit from Florida State. Anthony Watts. Notre Dame's played against Anthony Watts before. He was at Purdue.
Yep.
The
quarterback too, Henry Columbia, was just at Texas Tech. So they have a couple guys, man, that you're excited about, and a couple guys that I didn't really even know, to be honest with you, before the film watch. And I was like, oh, that guy's a player. Like, he can play, right? So the reality is that Notre Dame should dominate this football game. The thing that I'm interested in is that this is not a rollover, 1. And then 2, I want to see, this is kind of a gut check moment for me if you're Notre Dame, to be honest, because you just came off of a really emotional first game against the number 2 team in the country. You had I wouldn't call it devastating, but you had a loss that you would have, thought you were in the football game and you had a chance to win. And now you're coming back to a team. Now you're coming next week to a team that is a inferior opponent by all accounts, right? A team that you should just kind of roll over
to you. Yes. To you, correct.
In comparison to what Notre Dame has talent-wise, or an inferior player to you, 100%. And I am curious to see what is the energy around this program. Does Notre Dame just go out and just bury this team and you're like, okay, Notre Dame's okay. They have kind of the mental size cover maybe, but they're a resilient team, right? Or do they struggle early on? And it's kind of like one of those games where you're just kind of like, do you remember when they played UMass a few years ago? Where I'm just like, they
Mhm.
didn't really play that well, man. I mean, like they dominated them, but like they didn't really play well, right? And that's
Right.
like what I'm looking forward to is seeing, is there a quick turnaround from this coaching staff that this team is able to just kind of put Ohio State past them and be like, nah, dude, like we have a lot of football in front of us? Or is there a hangover effect from a close loss to Ohio State? Those things I'm looking forward to. But the key thing that we need to talk about later on is that this Marshall team is not a bad football team. They have a few football players that I really like, if I'm being completely honest.
So, Ryan, let's first focus on Notre Dame, right? We're a Notre Dame channel. We're going to focus on Notre Dame. And there are some areas that this football team has to get better, and they have to get better in a hurry. And that's not because, if you play like you did against Ohio State on Saturday against Marshall, you'll win. I mean, you'll beat them. You'll beat Cal. You'll probably beat North Carolina. You'll probably beat BYU. I mean, again, you lost to the number 2 team in the country. I think should be the number 3 team in the country just because of my stance on Georgia. So you play like that where you lead for most of it. That's a win against just about everybody else in your schedule until November 5th against Clemson. But it's not about just winning games. What do we always complain about with the last head coach? It's not results oriented, right? It's a results driven business, meaning the results obviously going to determine success. But the focus, in my opinion, the proper focus for coaches should never be on the result. It should be the process, right? Yep. And so to me, just winning on Saturday is not the goal, right? It's playing to your potential, getting to your potential as a football program, right? Beating Marshall by a field goal is okay. It's a win. It's great. You got to win.
Sure.
But I'm not walking away from that feeling good about this football team, right? It's time to start seeing some of the things that Notre Dame needs to focus on in order to better their football team. And so those are the things, Ryan, that I want to see from this team. Those are the things we're going to learn from. So let's kind of start off with just looking at Notre Dame first and foremost, right, Ryan? So the biggest thing is obvious. The Notre Dame offensive line needs to get better in a hurry. Yeah. And it's technical. I didn't have a huge issue with the fight of the group on Saturday. I mean, even rewatching the game, I was like, okay, they battled. They just played like they just weren't good. They didn't move their feet. Their hand play was not good. They didn't finish blocks. They lost blocks, which all ties into feet and hand play. They struggled with twists and stunts. And against this Marshall defense that's going to be moving all game long, they're in a 92 tackles for loss last year, which is a really good number. Yeah. And a really aggressive defense. They have a lot of kids coming back from last year's defense in the front 7. Some good athletes on the secondary that they're not going to be afraid of Notre Dame's receivers based on what they saw on Saturday. They're going to come up. They're going to be aggressive. And so they're going to throw all the line stunts and twists and backer fires and all that kind of stuff that Notre Dame struggled with on Saturday. You're going to see from Marshall. So fundamentally, technically, and schematically, this line needs to get better in a hurry.
And it's something too, Brian, where you talk about, I mean, that's an all-encompassing thing, right? Like the offensive line needs to play better. That's for the entirety of this season, that it needs to play better than it was in that game. There's no doubt about it. And then also when you're talking about the matchup with Marshall, and I know we're not going to get into the actual players for Marshall too much right now, but they have some good linebackers on the Marshall football team, man. Like they have some guys on the second level where if you're able to, my biggest thing with the Notre Dame offensive line, Brian, and I would love to hear your opinion on this, is offensive tackle play I thought was solid to good in spurts, right? The interior offensive line, I thought the worst part of it was not only were they missing blocks and just having miscommunication in general, but they weren't getting up to the second level. I mean, Tommy Eichenberg looked like a dude on that day. And all due respect to Tommy Eichenberg, he's not what he looked like against Notre Dame. He's not.
No.
Now, this Marshall team has a couple good linebackers where if you do not get up to the second level on these combos and just in general, they're going to make some plays, man. They're going to make some tackles for loss. They're going to make plays at the line of scrimmage. Their linebackers are the strength of this team, in my opinion, on both sides of the football. So from a Marshall perspective, the interior offensive line needs to play a whole lot better. And all encompassing, the offensive line just in general needs to play better, because that was probably my most disappointing thing. It's a close one between offensive line and defensive line, man. Like I was just very disappointed with how both lines played in the Ohio State game. So this team, I think, is going to be built off of the fact that they're going to be able to run the football. So Notre Dame's offensive line in general just needs to be a whole lot better in this contest because the talent is there. But for whatever reason, There was just a lot of miscommunication against Ohio State, and there was a lot of bad play against Ohio State. And give Ohio State some credit, right? Like their guys came to play on the defensive line. They played pretty good football. But I also think that
They
Notre Dame
played
didn't help them at
well,
all.
which
Yes,
exposed Notre Dame not playing well.
100%.
Right? It's not like Ohio State was just out there lollygagging around the field and Notre Dame just, look, Ohio State played hard. I was talking with a friend last night, Ohio State guy, and I said, I came away from this game more impressed with Ohio State than I was going in. And I was someone who had Ohio State as my preseason number 3 team because they haven't been a real physical team for a few years. And they were prepared to match Notre Dame's physicality and then in some instances exceeded it.
Yes.
And that's not where you need to – you're not going to go to Columbus and beat them if you get out physical. Now, there's 2 ways you can get out physical. One is you just don't play hard. And that wasn't the case. Ohio State just played harder. And that's going to be something that Harry Hiestand is not going to be overly fond of. And so that's obviously a big thing that they're going to have to get to and adjust and adapt. So line play has to improve, Ryan, a ton. Now, will Jarrett Patterson be back? Personally, and unless he's just like, if he wasn't healthy enough to play against Ohio State, there's no way he's going to be 100% by Saturday. I would not play him this week. I wouldn't. And I know it's probably not what they're going to probably try to get him back. But I mean, I would just let him rest all week. I would not take a chance of him aggravating that foot even more. You're going to need Jarrett Patterson.
Yeah.
And I want to see also how Andrew Kristofic and Josh Lugg and Zeke Correll respond, because I want to figure out who wants to stay in the starting lineup when Jarrett Patterson does get back.
The last 2 are the biggest important parts for me, right? Because I thought Andrew Kristofic competed. I don't think
he did what he did last year. Somebody asked me today, how did you think Andrew Kristofic played? I'm going to tell you what I said to him, Ryan, and I want to get your thoughts on this. That's why I'm interrupting you, because I want to get your thoughts on this.
Absolutely.
I said he wasn't he wasn't. So how did you think Kristofic played? And my response was basically he was of the interior guys. I said he was the best because he wasn't the worst.
Yes.
And what I meant by that was he was exactly the same guy he was last year. There were no snaps where it's just like, oh my gosh, Andrew Kristofic got killed. There were also no snaps you're like, oh wow, Andrew Kristofic did a great job. He just was just did his job, right? That's what he did last year. He just did his job. Now, he needs to play a lot better. I mean, there was a play where he was pulling around and he just gets in the hole and stops his feet and then lets the guy come to him. Like, no, finish that block. Like, you got around to the hole. You moved around quickly. Now go attack that guy, and those are the things that you're going to need to see, because you can't just be there. You know, you have to play better. But Josh Lugg had a couple. I thought Josh was there were times early he was good, especially on the touchdown drive. He was good, but then after that, his play was really inconsistent. And then Zeke Correll, he wasn't as bad as he was last year, Ryan, but he wasn't good either. He struggled, right? It wasn't as bad as he was last year, but it wasn't as good as he was in 2020 either. He's going to have to figure it out in a hurry.
And I was going to comment on the 2 that you just mentioned. I mean, Josh Lugg wasn't good during the game. I mean, I'll just leave it like that. And there were moments where Zeke Correll was the worst player on the field on both sides of the football, in my opinion. Like, it was not great, man. Like, it just was not even. No, let's rephrase. Not great illustrates that it may have been okay at points. It was bad. Like, let's call it what it was, man. Like, it was a bad performance. Zeke Correll has to have a nice little comeback game here. He has to, because there was question marks about him going into this season, right?
Yep.
And at some point, you are who you are on film, right? Like, I don't want to hear about development and like upside. At some point, what's he in his 4th year now at Notre Dame, right? Is this his 4th year?
Yeah, he's a senior.
3rd year. He's a senior. So senior with sophomore eligibility, right? So this is a kid where if it's not going to happen soon, it might never happen, if we're being completely honest, right? Like, at some point, the eye in the sky does not lie. Like, I can look at Tyler Buchner and be like, Tyler Buchner's going to be a lot better, because that was his first career start, right? Zeke Correll is now in his 3rd year of playing time.
He's creeping up on around 10 starts now, because he had 5 or 6 last year. He had 2 the year before. He's had another one Saturday. Like you said, Ryan, you can't use inexperience as an excuse for him. With all due respect to Coach Freeman, I'm sorry, these guys all came into the season with multiple games as starters.
Yes.
And to the point, the guys that you could point to as being inexperienced were your 2 best linemen on Saturday. Now, they weren't great either, Blake Fisher and Joe Alt, but they were still your 2 best linemen. So you can't really use that as an excuse. Your more experienced players, the ones who struggled the most.
Yes.
And that can't happen. Can't
It's
happen.
it was frustrating, man. I mean,
Yeah.
again, I don't want to rehash it too much, but it was a frustrating thing because I had just had a feeling that Notre Dame's offensive line was just going to come out and they were going to play very well and maybe potentially dominate the football game. Like that was kind of my
Right.
general feeling going into the game. And the interior offensive line really, really let us down, man. And it wasn't because I saw on Twitter, Brian, that like everyone's like, oh, the Jarrett Patterson loss, big loss. And yes, it is a big loss. There's no doubt. But the guy that replaced him was not your
Yeah.
worst interior offensive
Right.
lineman. That's the
You
point
didn't
of it.
struggle
Like,
because of the guy that replaced Jarrett
yes,
Patterson. Right. Now,
yes, 100%.
look, here's the deal, too. Now, what we're also seeing is an extreme overreaction in the other direction. Well, we're going to find out on Saturday was that a bad game where they're still trying to work out the kinks of look, what we saw on Saturday, Ryan, is not what you saw in the spring of practice. It's not what Vince and Sean and other people like. There's nobody that predicted this was going to come, as far as I know, simply because of the fact that they had played well in practice.
Yeah.
And so we saw them revert into some bad habits. That's really what we saw. That's the thing that's got to get fixed, right, Ryan, is get past those bad habits. Get past those bad habits, and then all of a sudden you're going to play better. And that's the thing. Because we saw Zeke Correll play really well in the spring game. We've seen him have good practices. And he just reverted back to some really bad habits on Saturday. And they got to fix them quickly because Marshall's going to throw a lot at you. Marshall's not going to physically smack you in the mouth the way that Ohio State did. They just don't have the size for that. I released our depth chart. Marshall released their depth chart today. So we put that out at irishbreakdown.com. And you look at their defensive line, Ryan, and it's 235, 294, 303, 240. Their backups are 247, 284, 293, 264. They're not small, but they're not big either. Like their 303 guy, 6'1". Anthony Watts is 6'4", 294. He's a sixth-year senior, right? They're not a real big group, but they're quick and they're going to attack.
There's no chance that Anthony Watts is 6'4", also, if we're being honest with ourselves. But
True. Yes. So those are things that are going to have to get corrected. So offensive line clearly is a big one. Then schematically, Ryan, this team needs to be more aggressive. And that's the big thing is I take the training wheels off your offense, take them off of your quarterback and attack. That's something else I want to see this weekend.
Yeah, we talked about it a lot on our post-game show. If you haven't seen the post-game show, it's got like 15,000 views at this point. So you should go back on the YouTube channel and check it out. I mean, Brian, I actually really enjoyed that because although it was after a loss, it was nice to just kind of vent for a little bit, and try to get like the real thoughts out there, man, which was pretty crazy. But I mean, for me, I think I said it on the show that I just felt like there were training wheels on Tyler Buchner. I just did, man. Like I just didn't think that there was trust, like it just did not fit. I did not feel like the game was called with a quarterback that you legitimately trust to run your offense.
Right.
Like that's how I took the game as. So I agree completely. I want to see, I'm not going to say, you need to come out and you need to throw the ball X amount of times, but like, I want to see the game opened up a little bit, man. I want there to be just kind of I want to leave the game and be like, okay, all right. There was more put on Tyler Buchner's plate this week. There was kind of there was a little bit of a let go of that leash, or at least a little pull that was given, like I need to see that.
Let him make a mistake. Look, Tyler Buchner's going to finish his career throwing an interception at some point. Can we be honest about that, right? And that was kind of one thing that troubled me a little bit from Coach Freeman was the whole, what you think? Well, first thing is he didn't turn it over. Like, look, man, this is always my concern with a defensive coordinator as the head coach, that you get so afraid of turning it over that you're afraid to let the kid be himself. Yeah. And he's going to make mistakes, and you want them being aggressive mistakes. And we need to see him be allowed to turn it loose a little bit, and when he does get those downfield shots, hit him, take advantage, hit him, move Braden Lindsey around, move Lorenzo Styles around, do more things to design plays for them and not other guys, right? Do things where you're moving Michael Mayer around, get Chris Tyree the ball more and in different ways. And then, of course, you can use Audric and Logan Diggs to hammer people. But those are things I want to see, Ryan, where it's a more aggressive game plan. It's a more moving the pocket, getting Tyler out in space. I know you don't necessarily want to use him as a runner every game, but you didn't use him enough as a runner, in my opinion, against Ohio State. You didn't.
Yeah.
And so, like you mentioned, when they did power read, it worked, but it's like they only used it in like 3rd and 11 or 3rd and 18 or 2nd and 23. And it's like, how about you use that on a 1st and 10 a little bit to change their eye discipline? I just felt like the jets were easy to see. It's like they just had that one motion all game, right? That jet motion is all they used, but didn't really use it a lot. You didn't use it with Braden. You didn't lose it Lorenzo. So when they were doing it, it was just pretty useless. And then when Chris Tyree did it, you were giving him the ball more often than not. So, just a little bit more just of that kind of stuff, right? Use your personnel better, differently. And then the other thing that's part of this, Ryan, is if I don't see Tobias Merriweather on the field early and getting targets early, I'm going to be a little ticked off because he is too good not to play. And we know he's made plays in scrimmages. He's been an impactful player. Okay, Ohio State games in the past. Now it's time to get ready for coming forward, and you're going to need Tobias Merriweather this year. So if we don't see him playing on Saturday and playing early, I'm not talking about like wait till you're up 21-0 to get in the game. I'm talking about like first or second series. He needs to be out there, and when he gets out there, I don't care if he knows 3 routes. You throw him the ball on one of those 3 routes on the first couple plays he's out there. 100% needs to happen. 100% needs to happen.
Well, I was going to say, Brian, it's like wide receiver. We've talked about a bunch. It's like you can simplify how you would use a wide receiver. Like you can just, if Tobias is a player where he's only comfortable running vertical base routes, then run vertical base routes. Right. Who cares? Like let him run comebacks, let him run fades. Like that's fine. Find a simplistic role for him. And I was just going to comment real quick because you mentioned it briefly, but the usage of Chris Tyree in this game was very odd to me. The usage of Lorenzo Styles, or I should say volume of Lorenzo Styles, was very odd to me. I need those guys because we've talked about Braden Lindsey is another guy that the usage was kind of weird in game 1. Those are your 3 most dynamic players in terms of long speed. And for whatever reason, they did not prioritize getting them the football in space, not nearly enough. So there needs to be more. You need to do more things with Chris Tyree. You need to feature Lorenzo Styles more, and you need to feature Braden Lindsey at a higher rate as well.
Bring
you do all those things.
RPOs back more consistently.
I really thought after that Oklahoma State game last year, I really thought the RPO was going to be a huge.
We saw it on the first play of the game.
I know, then it just was nowhere to be seen. But how many RPOs did you see Lorenzo Styles just kill this guy in Oklahoma State, man? Like just absolutely destroy. And I just don't understand like why these things that we're so excited about were not implemented in this offense. And that's what I'm looking forward to see.
Part of me thinks that was dictated. I'm just going off of what Coach Freeman said. And what he said is that's kind of they played the game plan he wanted them to play. And I want to see a more aggressive game plan. Look, we've said this a million times, guys. You're not going to win championships in college football right now, 17-13. You're just not. Yeah. And so you're going to have to be able to score. And to me, that involves being aggressive, getting the ball. I mean, the only look screen that they showed in the game, the now screen, some people call it now, sorry, I call it look screen, was to Michael Mayer, which is fine. I'm totally cool throwing those to Michael Mayer. He gained, I think, 6 or 7 yards on the one he got. Totally fine with that. But that can't be the only person catching that, right? You know what I mean? Like, and sometimes you're using those things to set something else up. That's the other thing is like, where are the double moves, right? Like, where are the things where Ohio State is playing coming up press? So you use post snap switches, use, motion wide fades, which they did to get Matt Salerno free, right? And on the play, he was called for offensive pass interference. And, but like, I need to see more of that. And I need to see that going to Tyree and Lindsey and Styles and Merriweather, not Matt Salerno, with all due respect to Matt Salerno.
Just the ways that you typically create space for players. I know you just talked about screens, right? Like that's a big one, obviously. Chris Tyree, Braden Lindsey, Lorenzo Styles. Again, like those are your guys that you want to get in space. Like those are the guys, man. And for whatever reason, that wasn't a priority. The only time we really saw Lorenzo and Braden Lindsey in this game as far as the usage was they wanted to send him vertically, which like is fine. I'm good with that. But also let's get a jet sweep occasionally. Let's get a screen. Let's do some level stuff. Like let's, get some crossing routes. Like, we talk about Ohio State running mesh so much, right? I didn't even see that much mesh in the game, by the way. But why isn't Notre Dame running mesh?
Ohio State, their game plan was built around, we're not going to let the Notre Dame defensive line take this game over. That's what their game plan was. And as we said in the show we did beforehand, they run a ton of mesh, but mesh takes time.
Yes.
Ohio State coached like they were really concerned about the Notre Dame pass rush, which is why CJ Stroud didn't have a lot of drop backs. It was quick game. It was swings. It was hitches. It was slants. It was stuff like that. It was stop routes, sit routes. It was stuff that's rhythm. Hit your top and let it go. And that's also partly why the Notre Dame pass rush wasn't as effective, because they were getting the ball out so quick.
Right.
And so, you gotta kind of look at those factors as well. And so I understand it, but maybe that's what Notre Dame did too. They were worried about the pass rush, perhaps. I mean, maybe that was it, but like you were saying, right? Like, where were the crossing routes? Where were the overs? Where were the levels? Like, there was none of that stuff, and there needs to be that stuff. And so the thing is like, and I know that people are frustrated by the game plan for Tommy Rees, and as we showed upon further review, there was more aggressiveness in the second half than we thought. There were more adjustments we thought. They just didn't get executed correctly. But the thing for me is there's a lot of stuff that we've seen from Tommy in the past, including the Oklahoma State game, that were just non-existent in this Ohio State game. Even though you had players that were there.
Yeah.
Last year when you were doing those things. Right.
And had success.
Right.
That's the biggest thing. Yeah.
So just to kind of give a little bit of a background for what Ohio State completed 11, 15, 17 of Ohio State's passes were completed short of the 17 of their 24 completions were completed under 10 yards in the game. They completed one pass of over 20 yards, and that was the touchdown pass. And they went 1 of 4 on throws over 20. They went 6 of 11 on throws 10 between 10 and 19. And a lot of those were those comebacks on the sideline when he was scrambling. A lot of those were that. And then the rest of them were just short stuff. And, that's where you need to see Notre Dame get a little bit more disruptive. But yes, I want to see more of that from Notre Dame. Give me a hitch route. And if they're playing up close, that's why another reason to start throwing the ball downfield, because teams are going to come up and press you. And we saw this from Marshall, right? As we talk about prep for Marshall, and part of the stuff about improvement is not just looking at the Ohio State game, but it's getting ready for Marshall. They're going to press you in the boundary for most of the game.
Yes.
I mean, they that's what they do. They'll play off to the field more often, but if I'm them, I'm pressing to the field as well, because Notre Dame has shown you if you press, they will not go to that guy. They will just not throw at that guy. And so best way to get back teams off, okay, you want to come up and press against 12 personnel, play cover 1 when your safety's over the ball, not out cheating towards the one receiver. Cool. Tyler, I don't care what the call is. We get that. You and so-and-so need to make a motion, and you're just hitting your drop, and you're letting it rip deep. Throw it deep. Complete the pass, right? And if the line can't protect for that, then you need to find some new linemen, because it's literally catch, 1, 2, 3, throw. That's it, right? And attack, be aggressive. I mean, that's okay. Yeah, I know that's not like a scheme that's going to like have people talking about how genius you are and all that, but you know what? It works, and be willing to do that. And this is a game for that, because as you said, they have actually one of the groups that I was most impressed with Marshall from an athleticism standpoint were their corners. Now, they're not great players, but they're pretty good athletes for that level. And you mentioned Stephen Gilmore is a good football player. They've got some length, and they've got some athleticism at corner. And so you're going to need to be prepared for that. I mean, you look at their starting secondary, it's 6 foot, 6'1", 6'1", 6'2". They've got some length. And so you've got to be aggressive and go at them, and basically not let every other team that has long corners say, hey, look, as long as you guys are aggressive with us, we'll take ourselves out of the game.
Right.
And that's something that needs to change. So,
well, I think if, just kind of putting a bow on my thoughts as far as Ohio State, Brian, because again, I don't want to dwell on it too much, but the one positive is that Notre Dame had a chance to win that football game. And I didn't think they played particularly well. Like, there was good. I mean, like, secondary was good. Right. And there were some moments where
that's it.
Every level where you're just like, okay, that was a flash, but like, I wouldn't really say any other, to your point, any other position that I would say particularly played well during that game. So Notre Dame has a lot to unlock here, man. And I just drives me crazy with the Notre Dame's going to lose 4 games this year. Right. People. And I'm just like, guys, we play the number 2 team in the country. And Notre Dame didn't play a good football game and still had a chance to win that game.
Right.
That's the point of it. Like, I don't think anybody thinks that Notre Dame played a good football game and they still had a chance. That tells me there was a.
I will still say their defense played good. I don't think their defense played great as a whole.
Yes.
and I don't think any unit didn't play. None of the units played bad.
Mhm.
You had some bad plays, but like the linebackers weren't great, but they weren't bad. Because
Right.
if they were, Ohio State would have scored 40 points. The defensive line was not as good as it should have been, but it was still good. It was
Mhm.
not good to the Notre Dame standard, but it was still good. They still battled. They still competed. They still shut down the run game for almost the entire game. And even at the end, it was like 10-yard gain, 12-yard gain. They were just leaning on them because it was warm down. Nobody
Yeah.
played bad on defense, but they didn't play anywhere close to their full potential as a unit. And that's the
Mhm.
thing for me, right, is you still were able to shut them down in a lot of different ways. And so this is still a very talented football team, but you need to go act like it. And then defensively, it's a quick conversation, Ryan. It's your dudes need to get back to playing like dudes. Like if
Yes.
Isaiah Foskey doesn't have a big game this week, I'm going to be concerned. And for Al Golden, you've got to do things to get them going early. You
Yes.
know, like, hey, Isaiah, we're going to do this. We're going to do this thing to kind of get you rolling. Hey, Jason Adamiola, we're going to put you here and we're going to ask you to do this, right? You know,
Mhm.
look, Marist, we're going to have some stuff for you this week. That's also partly good coaching is, you know, because you are playing a team that you're better than, you know, hey, I got to get these guys ready to go because I'm going to need them mentally right when we play North Carolina in a couple weeks,
Yes.
right? And when we play BYU and some other teams. And that Syracuse game isn't looking like a pushover now with when you
Yep.
look at what they did to Louisville this weekend. So
Mhm.
you got to get those guys ready to play, Ryan. And to me, you know, that's where I need to see that defensively. Just get your dudes back to playing like dudes. Because if you can keep playing as good as you did at the other spots as your complementary players, and of course Brandon Joseph was your one star that played like a star. If
Yep.
you can get those guys back to, and even Cam Hart struggled early, but bounced back and played much better after that. But if
Mhm.
you can get those guys back to playing the way that they're capable of, and those other guys continue to play well, you're going to have a really good football team. A really good football team. I mean, Clarence Lewis, I mean, he was the one player that everybody was most concerned about coming into the season. And I thought he played one of the best games of his career against the best pass attack that he's going to face until the Saturday after Thanksgiving, right?
Yes.
I'm not saying that one's better. I'm just saying this one is the best, and then they won't face another one like it until USC at the end of the year. So
Yep.
a lot to be encouraged by in this game, right? And you not only did they not play well, but they led for about 34 minutes of the game. And I mean, that's a good place to be. So now it's time to go play to your potential and put this Marshall team away. And then the one thing I want to see better in this game, better
Mhm.
tackling. It got better. It was better than what it
It
was
was better.
last year,
Yep.
but it's still not where it needs to be. Now, tackling usually is at its worst early in the season
100%.
because you're not able to do it as much in practice. I mean, just nowadays you can't do it. So I remember thinking, Ryan, I think I might have texted you this. I might have tweeted it. I don't remember how I communicated it. There's too many ways of communication now. Sometimes that's good. Sometimes that's really bad for an old guy like me. But it was like, man, I hope Notre Dame tackles better than what I'm seeing here in week 0. And then in week 1, you're like, good Lord, I hope they tackle better than what I'm seeing. And for the most part, they did. But I need to see even better. You know, that's the thing is, and especially stopping guys at the point of contact. Like, don't let guys push you forward for 4 yards. You know,
Yes.
stone them and then bring them back and then let your guys rally. I want to see more of that from this defense as well.
I mean, because looking forward for a second, right? I mean, the one thing about Marshall is that Marshall's going to stress you outside a little bit, right? Like they're going to throw a lot of screens, they're going to do that space stuff, and they're going to make you tackle well in space. And that is, I mean, North Carolina is going to do the same thing. USC is going to do the same thing. Although Boston College did not play in the first game as a team, Zay Flowers is going to stress you in space a ton. Garwo is a tough runner that you're going to have your lunch pail ready to
That
play.
line is so bad. George
I know
Takis
it is. I know it
balled
is.
on Saturday.
I
George
had a
Takis balled out on
I had an
Saturday.
I had an agent text me yesterday, Brian. I forgot to tell you. It was like, who's this Takis kid that came from Notre Dame? I was like, yeah, he's wasn't
He's really
really
good.
used much in the past game, but he's
Yeah.
getting his opportunity now at Boston College.
Yeah,
But
he's really good.
I mean, so those teams, like there's some dynamic weapons obviously that are still on the tap on the schedule for this year. And then I mean that's not even mentioning Clemson. And although Clemson's offense looked awful last night, they still have guys like Will Shipley and Pace at running back and guys that can hurt you, right? If you're not tackling well in those types of games. So there's a lot of tests defensively. And I think that Marshall is going to, again, I call it a gut check. This is a gut check for me. if Marcus Freeman is who I think he is, and I 100% believe that he is the man for this job, after a loss like that, it is a big indicator of how much trust he has from every player if they come out and they dominate this football game. That's going to be huge for me in this one. It's a gut check.
Speaking of last night, real quick, I'll be shocked if DJ Uiagalelei is Clemson's starting quarterback when they play Notre Dame on November 5th.
I truly, and let's talk about this for a second. I truly feel bad for DJ personally because they're still running the quarterback read stuff, right? The quarterback run game. They're still doing that stuff. They want to be a vertical based offense because that's what would be best for DJ, right? Kind of stretching the defense vertically, except their offensive line is bad as well. So they can't really protect long enough. And then also, Brian, quick game is not really DJ's strong suit in general. And also it's not their wide receiver strong suit at all. Like they aren't quick separators. They're big, long guys. Right. So, man, I just feel like that offense is not built for DJ, and it looked troublingly the same as it did last year under Tony Elliott yesterday, man. Like it was just ugly. And they still scored 41 points somehow.
Yeah, but a lot of that was late, like garbage points late.
It was.
I mean, it was 17-10 for a chunk of the second half, and then 24
for a hot minute. Yep.
Yeah. And then Georgia Tech had to do some things to try to take some risks and give Clemson short fields, and they put the game away. But I'll tell you what, when they brought in Cade Klubnik, that offense started looking all of a sudden like vintage Clemson offense. Again, late in the game, game's over, but still, that he's just got it.
I know we're not breaking down Clemson, but I will say this on the defensive side of the ball: Brian Bresee looked healthy, and Barrett Carter is a stud. My.
KJ Henry had a good game on Saturday too.
He had a great game
last night. I mean, he played well last night.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't hear much of Miles Murphy last night. I mean, when you're dominant up front and you're not even hearing about who the guy I think is their best player.
Yeah. They had Barrett Carter was playing. Trenton Simpson had some flash plays like he always does, and Brian Bresee looked healthy. Those are my main takeaways from that defense. I didn't even notice Miles Murphy.
Their secondary still is okay, but not okay. Not
the
great.
Makuba kid's pretty good. The safety's all right. He's decent, but yeah.
So Ryan, let's kind of start transitioning into Marshall here a little bit. Let's talk about the Marshall Thundering Herd. So this is a football team that went 7-6 last year in year one under Charles Huff, who we talked a little bit about before earlier. And, it was an interesting team because they were a really explosive offense the year before, I thought, but they were also a team that, kind of played they were explosive early, and then late in the year just collapsed, if you remember that. Like they climbed in the top 25 at one point in time in 2020 during the COVID year, and then just kind of collapsed late. Still went 7-3, went 7-6 last year, actually ended up scoring more points per game. They were consistently better. They didn't have the bottom out moments. They only had one game all year where they scored less than 20 points. That was against UAB, who was a 10-win team last year. So went 7-6 last year, had a 49-7 win over Navy, beat NC Central, which is an FCS team, beat Old Dominion by a touchdown, blew out North Texas, blew out Florida International, beat Florida Atlantic convincingly, and blew out Charlotte. They then lost by 4 points to East Carolina, lost to App State by a point, lost to Middle Tennessee by 6, lost to UAB by a touchdown. So their first 4 losses were all really competitive games, and then their last 2 games they got blown out by Western Kentucky. In the end of the season, gave up 53 points to Zappi in that offense, and then they lost convincingly to Louisiana Lafayette in the I think that was a bowl game. I can't remember if that was a bowl. Was that a bowl game, or was that like it wasn't the Conference USA Championship, right? It was a bowl game. It was just it was those weird days. It was like December 18th. I think that was a bowl game.
I think it was a bowl game too, because you said Marshall won 7-6, right?
Right.
So that 13th
some
game
teams had their bowl games canceled last year.
Right.
So there was still some of that nonsense last year. So but again, I think the December 18th, that's too late for a conference title game. And also they've changed leagues. So they're not a Conference USA team anymore. They were a Conference USA team last year, but they are now a Sun Belt team. Mm-hmm. So they are in a different league. So again, this is an opponent that is a quality opponent, meaning it's a team that's good enough to let you learn something about yourself. This isn't New Mexico Bowling Green, but it's also an opponent the Notre Dame should win convincingly against. But let's talk about some of the reasons, Ryan, just as an overview so people can understand what is it about Marshall that makes them good. And I think the first thing that I look at is they have really tried to recruit hard. And one of the things Doc Holliday, I thought, did a really nice job of, by the way, favorite coaching name ever.
Great name.
By the way. But one of the things Doc Holliday has really, really worked on in recruiting, and Charles Huff has done the same since he's got there, is recruit the South a ton. Their starting quarterback is from Florida. Their starting running back is a transfer from Florida State who is from Virginia, Kalen LeBourne. You probably remember, if you're a recruit, Nick, you remember him. He was a big-time recruit. Some people, I think one service had him as a 5-star. They're an 11 personnel team, Ryan. One back, one tight end, 3 receivers as their base offense. They'll mix it up a little bit, but they're a lot 11 personnel from what I can tell. You can correct me with these if I'm wrong, Ryan, because I know you've watched a lot more film so far than I have. All 3 of their starters at receiver are all from Florida. The number 2 players at each position at receiver are Florida, Tennessee, and then there's one kid listed as the 3rd guy, but he actually has played a decent amount, Shadid Ahmed, and he's from Texas. Their starting tight end is from Jersey. Their backup's from Alabama. They have a kid named Driscoll who spells his name correctly in the offensive line from Kentucky. So their offensive line is more Midwest-ish. And it's Kentucky, PA, West Virginia, Kentucky, and Ohio. And then you go down to their defense. Here's where guys are from: Georgia, South Carolina, Florida, Tennessee, South Carolina, Louisiana, Tennessee, Florida. That's where their starters are from on defense. So again, this is a team, Ryan, that is trying to go south because they want to be athletic. Now, are they as athletic as Notre Dame and teams like that? No. But for their level, they're a pretty athletic football team for their level. And that's something that's going to present some challenges for Notre Dame. They're long, and they're longer than you'd expect a team from the Sun Belt or Conference USA to be at the skill positions. Because we mentioned earlier their secondary, but their receivers, Corey Gamage is a good football player. He's 6'4". Talik Keaton, really good football player, 6'1". Caleb McMillan's going to play a lot. He's 6'3". Brian Robinson, 6'1", 202. Their tight end is 6'3", 234. They've got some size. Their offensive line is 314, 311, 300, 325, and 316 across. They're not an undersized offensive line. They have a big physical offensive line. They don't move well, but they're big and physical. And then, as we mentioned on defense, their linebackers are 6'2", 6'2". Their stud is 6'3", 214, and then their 4 DBs are 6 foot, 6'1", 6'1", and 6'2". So this is a team that's got some height and also some corresponding length to go with it. So that's the first thing that stood out to me when I was looking at Marshall.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really well said, Brian. I think that there's a lot of players on this Marshall team that I think are better than the level they're playing on. I'll leave it at that, right? Like I talked a little bit about, like, I think there's one specifically that I think could be a contributor on a Power 5 team, like pretty easily. But I mean, you mentioned Corey Gamage is 6'4", 220 pounds. Like, he is long. Kid. He's pretty fast too, man. Like, he's not slow-footed. Like, he's an pretty explosive kid. He's a very linear player, right? So he's not going to like change direction incredibly well. But as a vertical-based player, and after the catch, man, I mean, at least last week, like, he made a play after the catch. I was like, oh, he can break some tackles too, man. Like, he's not just like a stiff vertical player either. Like, he can play in space a little bit. So you got a kid like him. You got LeBourne, who, hey, man, I mean, we talked about Rasheen Ali, who's a fantastic player. Unfortunately, is not with the team right now. But LeBourne's 212 pounds. There was a reason that he was highly coveted at one point, right? Like, he had 12 carries for over 100 yards in their opening game. Again, against Norfolk State.
Hasn't been able to stay healthy. That's the reason. He has not had a statistic gained since 2019.
Yes.
Because of injuries. I mean, it's crazy. That's been the reason.
But when he's healthy, he's still got some juice to him, right? Like, I was impressed by the burst and acceleration he had. Not a creative runner, but like as a downhill 2-gear runner, he's got something to him. Talked about Gamage. Henry Colombi, transfer from Texas Tech, was at one point 6-year player. He was Jordan Love's backup quarterback at Utah State there for a little bit, which is pretty funny. And then you mentioned my favorite player in this offense, Brian, Ethan Driscoll. Best last name on the team, in my opinion.
I bet you $20 he's related to me somehow. Because my family has the Driscolls have lineage in Kentucky. My granddad's family's from Kentucky, and you don't see it spelled Kell very often. So I'll bet you $20 he's some sort of distant cousin. So Sorry, fam. You're going down Saturday, though.
Right. Hey, man, yes. But I was just going to say about him, Brian. I mean, we talked about looking the part. My man is 6'9", 314 pounds. So he's a big fellow, man. And he's better athlete than I anticipated. Pretty good flexibility. Power isn't great. It's still developing. But like, to your point, some good looking athletes on this team, man. On the offensive line, in the pass receiving core, on defense, there's some guys, man, that stick out, and you're like, he should probably be playing a little higher than maybe at Marshall than he is.
Yeah. Their quarterback's an interesting guy, Ryan. Henry Colombi, transfer from Texas Tech, and had an okay first game, I thought, on Saturday against Norfolk State. I mean, they just kind of ran on Norfolk State.
Yep.
He's a kid who I think is a decent athlete. To me, he just doesn't have much of an arm to stretch you deep.
He's an RPO thrower.
Yeah.
He's an RPO kid. Yep.
Good accuracy. I mean, you look at him last year at Texas Tech, it was a similar thing. I mean, he completed 64% of his passes, and it was a lot of stuff getting him the ball in space, letting guys kind of run with the ball. He's not really going to stretch you down the field. He's an okay athlete, but he can be overwhelmed by pressure. I think that's going to be something too. But if you let him sit with a clean pocket and you give him and you play off coverage, he's going to pick you apart because he's a smart kid. He's a good decision maker, and he's accurate. Good accuracy. Good, not great, but good accuracy from what I've seen. But he's also a kid that's played in some big games. I mean, he's played. I mean, you look at him last year, Ryan. He played at Texas. He went 18 of 24. For 324 yards and 3 touchdowns at Texas. He's played at West Virginia, went 23 of 34 for 266 yards at West Virginia. He threw 7 passes, completed, or 212 passes, completed 7 at Oklahoma. The point being, the reason I'm saying this is because when you look at a kid like that, a year before, went 30 of 24, 42 against Kansas State, has played at TCU. The reason I'm bringing all of this up is because he's an experienced kid who has played in loud environments. He's not going to be overwhelmed by playing in Notre Dame State. He played at Darrell K. Royal Stadium. Or he's played in Norman. He's not going to be overwhelmed by the Notre Dame crowd and stadium. You're going to have to overwhelm him with your defense.
And he's a 6-year player.
Right. And he's an experienced kid who's played in, not just been on the team in those games, right? So has played in those games. So he's gonna have them in a position where he's gonna know where to go with the ball. And yeah, I get that it was Norfolk State, but he went 24 of 26 in that game.
That's
right.
Good.
But he also
only 90-something%.
Right. 92.3. And so it's funny, only one of his passes hit the ground because he threw a pick in the game. So 25 of 26 passes were caught by somebody. I say kind of jokingly, but QB rating of over 163. I did not.
Oh, wait to see this guy. Oh,
well, but see, that's the thing though, is we kind of dive into the personnel. He'll turn the ball over.
Yeah.
I mean, we talked about what he did last year. He threw as many interceptions as he did touchdowns, 5 and 5. He threw an interception, at least one interception in 5 of the 6 games that he started. The only exception being against West Virginia. And so he'll turn the ball over. There's no doubt. He went 8-4, 8 touchdowns and 4 picks in 2020. He went 2-1 in 2019. And so, I mean, you're talking about a kid who's about same. He's got 4 more touchdowns than he has interception in his career. He'll turn the ball over. He'll make some of those throws if you pressure him, especially.
Yes. Well, I asked you if you'd see the interception this past week because he's a kid for me that when I literally wrote in a preview for the site that if you speed up his process, he's going to make some bad decisions.
Yep.
Like that's 100% because he's a rhythm-based passer. He wants to throw screens. He wants to throw RPOs. That's because, like you said, he doesn't have a big arm. So he's not going to push the ball down the field. He's a short to intermediate passer, which is fine in his system. It's completely fine.
That's what they want.
But you saw the one time that he had to really speed up his process and kind of saw things late, throws an interception because when you speed up that process, he's going to get pushed into bad decisions. And especially if he second guesses himself, that's when things get a little hairy. Because on his interception he threw this past week, kind of double clutched and then threw into the end zone, right? And I'm just like, oh, yep, that's not the process he was going through in his head, right? Like that's not what he wanted to do. So I agree. A rhythm-based passer, RPO kid, good in that system. But again, if Notre Dame is able to get some quick pressure and able to speed up that process, you can force Henry Colombi into some bad decisions. There's no doubt about it.
Right. So that's going to be a part of it. He's going to have some weapons around him. There's talent around him. There's athletes around him. The line's big and physical, not overly athletic. Let's go on the other side of the ball, Ryan, because this is the side of the ball to me that's going to determine just how good Marshall is going to be this year. They're going to be a good offense this year. They were a good offense last year. The question for me is, will they be good enough on offense to go out and be better than what they were last year, which was a bowl-eligible team in the Conference USA Sun Belt level? And at times last year, I'll be honest with you, Ryan, I was impressed with their defense at times, and then at other times you're like, ugh. And then when you look at their points per game, they gave up 23.8 points per game, which is not great. Yeah. But that ranks second in their conference last year. I mean, so it's a conference where there's a lot of points being scored. Right. And so, they ranked second last year in the Conference USA in points per game allowed. They ranked second in the conference last year in yards per play, which is good. They ranked second in passing yards allowed. They ranked second in yards allowed per completion. They ranked first in yards allowed per attempt. These are good ratings. You want to be high in those areas. And they ranked first in opponent quarterback rating. Yeah. So they couldn't stop the run. And that's also part of it because they ranked 12th out of 14 teams in yards allowed per game on the ground and 14th in yards allowed per play. But the thing that impressed me, it's okay. I expect their yards to be down because they give up a lot of rushing yards. But what you see is the yards per attempt, yards per completion, and the rating are also really low, which is more indicative of the quality of their pass defense. And so that's the thing is they had some games where they gave up a lot of yards last year in the pass game. But those were games where I actually thought they played well. And a perfect example for me is the Western Kentucky game. They held Bailey Zappi. It's how you pronounce his name, correct? Did I say that
Zappi.
correct?
You got it.
Right. They held him to 328 yards. Now, you may say, dude, they gave him 328 yards. He only completed 52.1% of his passes, which is low for him. And the other thing is that's an offense that averaged 433 yards per game passing last year. Bailey Zappi averaged 426.2 passing yards last year. It's completed 69.2% of his passes. And I kind of equate it to kind of like playing Navy. Right? When you're like, yeah, it gave up 230 rushing yards in Navy. Yeah, but they rushed for 320 a game, and we held them 100 yards below their average. Right. And that's kind of how Marshall was last year. I think the East Carolina game was the one game that I thought was bad, their pass defense. They had a bad day that day. Yes, East Carolina is a decent passing team, but not that. I mean, last year, East Carolina was about 270 per game. They went for 395 against them, and then App State went for 283. But the next 5 games, they held all their opponents under 200 yards, including some teams that like to throw it around a little bit. I believe North Texas is still an air raid team, and they went for $134, 17-32. Yep. So they went through a stretch there where their pass defense was pretty good, and so that's kind of what I want to see is can you throw on them? Because if you can get the pass game going and throw the ball down the field, then they have no chance. Because you should be able to run on them, and if they can't run on this defense, Ryan, that's going to be a problem. That's going to be a big problem because this is not a good rushing defense. And they held Norfolk State to 30 yards on 31 carries, but it's Norfolk State, right? That's a mediocre FCS team. So you should be able to run on them. If not, that's going to be a problem. But it's can you be balanced? And what I also don't want to see is just them come out and just I understand the desire to just come out and push them around or attempt to push them around, but I don't know if that necessarily makes you better. You need to come out and run your offense. Agreed. I think that's going to be the key: is run your offense, because what you don't want to do is just try to bully them. Yes, because that'll work, but you're not beating Clemson that way. You're not beating USC that way. You're not beating Ohio State in a rematch if you get one that way. You've got to learn to be able to score, and that's what I want to see, because I want to see you test your athletes against their athletes, because I think Notre Dame should be able to bully Marshall, but I want to see them go after Stephen Gilmore. Yes. If you don't trust your receivers to go after Stephen Gilmore, then what are we doing here? And what I mean is he's a good football player, but he's not some future top 15 NFL draft pick that just happened to end up at Marshall. Right? I mean, the DNA is good, but I mean, you know what I mean, Ryan? Like if you're afraid to challenge this secondary, then this is going to be a long year, in my opinion.
I agree completely. And I reiterate what you just said about let's not just bully them, because I think one of our main points that we started with is that we want the leash to be taken off of Tyler Buckner, right? So him just handing the ball off 40 times, whatever the number is, it doesn't really do anything for me. It doesn't answer any question marks, right? Like, this is a game where I want questions answered a little bit, right? Or at least a blueprint to like what it's going to look like. I'm not asking you to show everything and throw the kitchen sink out there, but need to see something more than I saw last week. And I think that the reason you can run on this team, Brian, in my opinion, is the defensive tackle group is not very good. I mean, you talked about Anthony Watts from Purdue, but it's just kind of a underwhelming group inside. So I think Notre Dame should have some success in the interior defensive line, offensive line, if they're able to create some substantial movement there. But the biggest thing I want to see is, I talked about this a little bit in the beginning of the show, these linebackers are pretty good for Marshall, man. Right. It's a good group, and they need to show up and get to the second level on this team, because Abraham Beauplan, I'm here to tell everyone right now, is don't be surprised when number 7's making some plays in this week, because I went back to watch some of his games from last year, watched him in this game, even though he didn't have a gaudy stat number. I think he had 4 tackles and a tackle for loss and a 1 quarterback hurry. Like, he wasn't overly impressive from a stat sheet perspective, but again, they won 55-3.
But give us stats from last year, Ryan, and it's a different story. I mean, you're talking 110 tackles, 10 tackles for loss, 2.5 sacks for a linebacker.
This is a kid who plays weak side linebacker in their system, and he's a kid that I think is going to play on the NFL level. Not saying he's going to be a starting caliber NFL player, but I guarantee, I feel pretty solidly that I think that he can last on the NFL level for a few years. So he's a good football player, Abraham Beauplan. Eli Neal, his middle linebacker partner, who's number 24 for this team, who is also a good football player. He's more of a downhill type of kid, even though he's actually a little smaller than Beauplan. He's 6'2", 228 pounds, but he's got a little bit of that hammer to him, man. Like, he'll get downhill, he'll fill. Not as quite a good athlete as Beauplan is, but he's also a good football player. And then, I mean, Brian, the best player that they had defensively in their first game was Charlie Gray, who he plays their stud backer role, is what they call it. And it's basically Notre Dame's rover, right? Like, they run a 4-2-5 base. He's playing that kind of overhang position. He is 6'3", 214 pounds. I think he was listed at 213 pounds, somewhere in that ballpark. So he's got a little bit of linebacker to him, a little bit of safety. He's coming off an 8 tackle, a tackle and a half performance, half a sack. He does a lot of nice stuff working from depth. He's a little over aggressive at times. So I think that I'm looking forward to the RPO game that we talked about a little bit in this week, because I think you can make Charlie Gray guess wrong a little bit, because he's a very aggressive kid, but he is also a good football player. So the second level of the Marshall defense is right near Power 5 caliber, in my opinion.
Yep.
I would say. I think it's a good second level. And then you mentioned Stephen Gilmore, who's arguably their best defensive player. I mean, he's a good football player, younger brother of Stephon Gilmore, and he's had a good Marshall career, man. Like, he's been a 4-year contributor to this team, and he wasn't tested very much last week. No tackles, only had 1 pass breakup, but that's because they don't really throw the ball at him much anymore when you're playing against Marshall. So I'm looking forward to seeing if they challenge him a little bit. And again, interior offensive line has to come to play, because although the interior defensive line is not great for Marshall, they have some linebackers. So you need to be able to get up to the second level and then stop some of their momentum, or else number 7, number 24, number 1 are going to make some plays. So the interior offensive line, I think, has to play a ton better in this game.
Yeah. So the other thing too, schematically, is Marshall's not just going to line up, and they're going to do a lot of different things. They're going to show some different looks. You'll see a lot from them, Ryan, which I find interesting. And I saw it against Norfolk State and a little bit. I've watched just a little bit of that game, but you saw it last year too. There's times where there's only 2 dudes with their hand in the ground on defense.
Yep.
I mean, and so it can hurt you as a defense to be that way but the thing is they do that because it allows them to do more movement that way. So, that's the thing you have to be prepared for. So if Notre Dame can handle the stuff, and we'll get into some of the stuff as we get into the deeper into the breakdown, but that's the thing is I actually like this as a test for Notre Dame, the Notre Dame offensive line, Ryan, because this is a defense that can run. It's not just some big, slow or small, slow Bowling Green, New Mexico team where you can actually – I remember watching the New Mexico game. They did not play that well that game, but they were just so much better than New Mexico. They could still hang 66 on them. And I'm like, I wasn't impressed by that 66. I mean, like, you're not – I just wasn't impressed. this is a team that, yes, you should smash them score wise, but you're going to have to earn that smashing, right? That's
Yes.
the whole thing. It's kind of like Toledo. Notre Dame should have beat Toledo convincingly, but you have to earn that convincing win. They're not just going to show up and like roll over and be like, okay, spank us, please. They're going to say, hey, we're going to come here battle. There's a bunch of kids in that football team saying, look, if I can play well against Notre Dame, I can find myself on some people's draft boards. I'm going to make myself some money. It's a money game for me.
It is a money game.
So that they're going to bring it on Saturday. And so it's going to be a great test for the Notre Dame offense, because they're not just going to line up and play. They're going to throw some different looks at Tyler Buchner. They're going to make him read defenses and try to bait him into mistakes and all those type of things. Now, they weren't great at turning the ball over last year, but they're going to do a lot of those things against Notre Dame. And so we're going to learn a lot about Notre Dame because of that, because they're going to make them work for it. Again, there's got to be a realization of who the opponent is, right? And that's just what Notre Dame fans like to do, is they like to convince them. They're like most fan bases, right? You convince yourself that every team you play is just not good. And so and then when you only win by 28, you're like disappointed, only win by 28, right? Like, you have to understand who your opponent is to then appreciate when you do win convincingly. If they are able to beat them the way that they should, let's say they earn a 45-14 victory. You look at them and say, man, that's a really good win, because that team is a decent team, right? You had to earn that. And so if the Notre Dame offense does come out and click on Saturday, that's going to be a good sign. Mm-hmm. And then you'll get another big test on Saturday against Cal, who Cal has a lot of issues as a program, Ryan, and you and I have talked a lot about that.
Yep.
But one thing Cal can do is they can play some defense.
For sure.
And that's the thing. So we're going to learn a lot about the offense the next couple of weeks. Will it mean that they've arrived? No, it's still Marshall and Cal. But they're going to present tests that are going to be unique to things Notre Dame needs to learn about themselves. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the important thing when looking at this game. So
again, man, we talked about the last one being a true barometer of where your team is, but I think that this is a barometer of how much you've improved. And again, you don't have to be perfect to beat a Marshall convincingly. You don't have to. Your talent is much higher than them. But I think it's going to tell you a lot from a mental capacity type of thing, right? Like, what's the mentality of this football team that you're able to come back and play a solid football game and get things going on the right track? Because this is kind of a table setter, man. We know that the schedule is going to get harder from here on out. The next couple weeks should be games that Notre Dame wins pretty convincingly, but down the stretch, there's going to be the BYUs and the Clemsons and the USCs, and you have to start setting the table to make this run. Because unfortunately, with the loss of the first game, Brian, like, if this team is going to have if they're going to have a chance at a playoff berth, they need to run the table. So they have a low margin for error now. So I think it's going to be a interesting game. I'm looking forward to see it. And of course, I'm also going to be there. So I want to win while I'm on campus. You know what I mean? So
speaking of that, so I do want to remind people of this. We're not quite sure where yet, but we will be having an Irish Breakdown tailgate on Saturday. We're going to try to get out there around 10 o'clock is our goal as of right now. So we will hopefully kind of be able to make that happen and try to get up there. But we're going to have a nice big spread. My parents are coming in town, so they're going to cook. My mom's I tried to tell her yesterday, like, don't worry about it. Just come in, just hang out, relax. I want you to nope. She enjoys to cook. She enjoys to serve people. So we'll do that. We'll try to get there around 10 and then just kind of be there the whole time. So right now we're still trying to find get some parking passes. We're either going to be in Stadium or Joyce, hopefully. But we're still working on trying to acquire those. But we will be having a big Irish Breakdown tailgate this weekend. So if you are coming in town for the Marshall game, definitely going to look for us. You'll get a chance to meet me. You'll get a chance to meet Ryan. Vince will eventually get there. So he's going to be doing the IB countdown to kickoff, hopefully with Sean Stiers at 10 o'clock in the morning. So they'll do that till noon. And then Vince will come on over too. Sean Davis is going to be in town this weekend. So pretty much the whole crew is going to be on campus this weekend, with the exception of Sean Stiers, who I'm hoping is still going to be sitting at home on Saturday. So
yes,
he and I are going to have a little chat this weekend because, so we'll see. But yeah, so we'll be there, and then we'll be in there till it's time to head into the stadium. So definitely look for that. So if you're going to be at the game this weekend, make sure you're paying attention to my Twitter account if you are on Twitter. So at Coach D178, we will text the lot where we are, and then I'll also take a picture of kind of the number of the parking area that we'll be at, and then you'll see us. We'll have an IB flag, and of course, you'll see us rocking our IB gear because we always rock our IB gear, or usually you and I do anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where we'll be. So we are going to obviously have a lot about Marshall this week. Tomorrow we will dive into the stacking up. So Ryan and I will kind of look at how the numbers stack up and, dive into the matchups even further. I'll have a chance to watch even more film by then, dive even further into the matchups. And then Thursday we'll do 1:00. We'll do keys to victory for Notre Dame, things that we need to see. And then on Friday we'll have our prediction show, and we'll predict the Notre Dame game, Ryan, but there's also some other games this weekend that I'm really looking forward to discussing on Friday too, because our new thing is we not only do the Notre Dame stuff, but we're also going to kind of predict some of the top games this weekend. I got the Notre Dame game wrong, but I did go 3-0 in the other games, and I got my upset game correct as well, because I predicted that Arizona was going to go on the road and beat San Diego State, who they were a touchdown underdog against, and got beat by last year at home. I don't know what it is about what they're doing at Arizona. I just think I just had a feeling about that one. So wish I was also correct on my feeling about Notre Dame and Ohio State. But the defense was there. But we'll be talking about Alabama, Texas for sure. That'll definitely be one game that we'll be talking about this weekend. We'll figure out some other games, but there's some interesting games this weekend. Tennessee Pitt is going to be an interesting game this weekend. Kentucky at Florida is going to be an interesting game this weekend. USC at Stanford, Baylor at BYU. So I don't know if I can say, I don't know if I can say week 2 is going to be quite as good as week 1, but it's still a good weekend. Arizona State at Oklahoma State, as I mentioned, Baylor and BYU, Kentucky, Florida. It's going to be and here's another one that people may not. Houston at Texas Tech is going to be really interesting.
Yeah, because Texas Tech, unfortunately, Tyler Shuck got hurt, but they have the actual better quarterback playing now, and Donovan Smith, which will be interesting. Yeah. Who's Rutgers playing, Brian? They're 1-0. They're off to a great start.
See, you know who else looked good on opening weekend? Again, they didn't play a very good team, but Duke looked really good. Riley Leonard at quarterback looked really good.
Riley Leonard can play. Yeah,
yes.
He's a good quarterback.
And they called off the dogs in the second half because it was 24-0 at halftime for Duke. And again, look, I get it. They were playing Temple. But it's Duke, right? I mean, it's Duke. We're not talking about like Miami hanging 70 on Bethune-Cookman. I mean, Duke went 3-9 last year. They lost to Charlotte last year. Their wins were over North Carolina A&T, a bad Northwestern team, in Kansas. That was it. So heck of a first game for Mike Elko in being able to beat Temple convincingly. And then, of course, Northwestern gets a chance to kind of bounce back. So I'm looking to see who Rutgers. Washington State at Wisconsin. That'll be an interesting game.
Talk about a battle of completely opposite structures.
Yeah. Iowa State is going to be a really fascinating game because Iowa was terrible in their first game. They got to 7 points. This is the crazy thing, Ryan. They got to 7 points without a touchdown.
Mm-hmm. I watched the entire game and it was awful.
How do you do that? They won 7-3 without a touchdown.
Yes.
Like, that is ugly. That means you scored the same amount of offensive points as South Dakota State. Like,
I put in the poke fun at one point, but Jack Campbell was responsible for more points during that game than Spencer Petras was. So
that was bad.
Yep.
That was really bad. Like, very bad. Really bad. I mean, not only could they not throw, they couldn't run it.
Nope.
Against South Dakota State. That's really bad. So they are in trouble. It's like Notre Dame. We're talking about Notre Dame not playing well on offense.
Yeah.
Right? That was against Ohio State. And they at least did some things relatively well. I mean, they had 166 yards of offense against South Dakota State. Now, is South Dakota State a good FCS team? Yes, they are.
Yes, very good.
They are. Sure. They are. They were 11-4 last year. Made it to the NCAA tournament. Had some good wins last year. Beat North Dakota, who's a good football team. Beat Colorado State last year. They killed
Colorado State.
Yeah,
killed them. Yeah,
but should not be a team that Iowa scores 7 points against.
No,
I mean, Ryan, they only gave up fewer than 10 points 3 times last year against Lindenwood, Indiana State, and Dixie State.
Oh, Division II Lindenwood, huh?
I mean, my man, come on now. That was bad. So we're going to definitely have some Wagner. Rutgers played with Wagner. So
that's a tough game.
Fighting Greg Schianos are going to start off 2-0. There you go.
That's nice, man. I saw someone said in the chat that Oregon State plays Fresno State. That's an interesting game. That's a really interesting game.
Oregon State smacked Boise State.
I like their coach, Jonathan Smith. He's doing a good job.
Coach.
He's doing a good job.
And he's done it sneaky. Like nobody talks about him. And the other thing I like is they're not gimmicky.
No.
Like they don't line up and play like, they don't do like air raid. They line up and run at you.
Yes.
Like they are a running football team. And the thing about the win over Boise State is they didn't run it that well against Boise. No. Not for them. I mean, they're a team like 212 yards last year. They were like 30 some yards below their season average, than what it was. And then the last full year before that, or the COVID year, I mean, they were almost just under 200. So they like to run the football. And they didn't run the football all that well against Boise, and still won because I thought their quarterback, Chance Nolan, made some big plays. And so
he did.
And he turned it over a couple times too. Like, so they didn't play a clean game and they still smacked Boise State.
Their defense played a really good game, I thought, against Boise. And I mean, Jonathan Smith, so he went to Oregon State. He played at Oregon State, but he would not be surprised if he gets some bigger offers here pretty soon.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting because, like you said, I mean, Notre Dame fans remember Jonathan Smith. He was the quarterback on that Oregon State team that beat Notre Dame in the Fiesta Bowl in, was it 2000? When they had Ken Simonton at running back, Chad Johnson, TJ Hushmanzada. It's a good football team. Smacked Notre Dame. He was their quarterback, and he did a great job at Washington. He was, I believe, their offensive coordinator when they went to the college football playoff. The year that Jake Browning threw like 40-some touchdowns. I'm pretty sure that is correct. So, I'm 2000 Washington football team. Let me pull this up real quick. I want to make sure that I'm actually accurate on this. Then yes, Jonathan Smith was their offensive coordinator that year, and Jake Browning had like 40-some touchdown passes, and then he was gone within 2 years. He was at Oregon State, and so younger guy, 43 years old, so not like an older guy, took over an Oregon State team that was a hot mess, and he had him in a bowl game last year. So
that was the weirdest 40 touchdown season I've ever seen, by the way. Jake Browning. It was around some very average seasons, but he just threw 40.
Well, and he would just throw it as far as he could, and John Ross would run underneath it. And he had Dante Pettis was a really good pass catcher on that team. I mean, he had some dudes, and the Pac-12 stinks on defense.
He had Miles Gaskin too, didn't he? Did he have Gaskin back then? The running back? May have. Can't remember.
Maybe one of the years. I don't know if he had it in 2016. I mean, I literally don't know if he had it. Yeah, Miles Gaskin ran for 1373 that year, and Levon Coleman ran for 800 some that year as well. So I mean, he was just throwing bombs to John Ross and Dante Pettis. They had Chico McClatcher. That was before all his injuries. Chico was a pretty dynamic kid as well. Daryl Daniels at tight end, Drew Sample at tight end, who's now in the NFL. So he had some dudes around him, and he would just kind of chuck it, and and just. But yeah, it was such a weird year because like the next year he dropped down to 19.5, and then the next year he was at 16.10. Like that's the weirdest stat line I've ever seen. He was 16.10. It's like he had like a steroid year in baseball. You know what I mean? Like you know what I'm talking about? Like where look at these guys that like they're just like 18 homer guys, and all of a sudden they break out like 50 and, like, in the steroid era, and then like the next year they're down to 17. You're like, gee, I wonder what was different that year. Like.
Well, I think that Browning just thought he was back at Folsom High School because I told you that one before where he threw like 91 touchdowns the 1 year in Folsom. Like, doesn't make any sense, man.
It's insane. So going to be some fun games this weekend for sure that we're going to talk about this weekend.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to move on to the mailbag next. But before we do, make sure y'all hit that like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Share this podcast. If you're listening via podcast, give us a 5-star review. We would greatly appreciate that. We are going to do a mailbag. We only have a couple questions in there right now. So get those questions in. But again, before you go, if you're going to leave us, hopefully you stay, hit that like, hit that subscribe, and hit the notification bell on the Irish Breakdown Podcast. So Ryan, let's go mailbag. And we don't have a lot, so we're kind of still trying to find some, but most we don't a lot of comments, but we're looking for some questions as we get to this mailbag. So we'll get to those as well. We'll start off with a little super chat from FUSCND88. Haven't seen the chat for a while, man. So good to see you. It's okay, fellas. Dakota here got surprised with tickets to the Marshall game this weekend. That's awesome. From his wife for his birthday. That's a pretty awesome wife thing to do right there. One question. I need a top 5 eateries around South Bend. Breakfast and pizza spots preferred, please. Okay. So breakfast spots, a lot of people have given you, I'll just tell you my 2 favorite breakfast spots. Number 1, the Pancake House, which is over by Notre Dame, is pretty good. There's another place, Metro Diner, which is off of University and Main, which is in Mishawaka. It's not very far from campus. It's like less than 10 minutes from campus. It's over by the Target. It's called a Metro Diner. That's also really good. That's actually my wife's favorite place. If I want pancakes, I go to the Pancake House, obviously. But if your breakfast is more of like you like eggs and hash browns and bacon and stuff like that, I actually like the Metro Diner even more than Pancake House. I like their other stuff better, but Pancake House has really good pancakes. And Pancake House other stuff is pretty good too. But those are my two favorite breakfast places. We go to a place called Copper Creek over by our house. It's okay, but that's more about a matter of convenience than it is about it being the best breakfast place, because that stuff's all a little bit of a ways away from where we live. It's like 20, I mean, it's not that far. It's like 20 minutes away, but we don't often have time to spend 40 minutes in a car go and have breakfast. We're usually pretty busy. Pizza places. My two favorite, and there's a lot, Barnaby's, people talk about Barnaby's. I'll just tell you what my two favorite pizza places are. Number one is Rocco's, which is hard to get into. It's like kind of a destination spot for people when they come in town. So it can be harder to get into there if you don't have a reservation. The other place, my favorite pizza place in town, flat out, no doubt about it, is Polito's, which is over on Hickory. It's not far from campus. It's over off Hickory and McKinley. And it is this little tiny place. It's right beside it's in between like a shopping center and a Long John's, or what's it called? Long John Silver. Is that what you call it? Right. Okay. That kind of place. And it's right there. And it is great pizza. It's like kind of like New York style pizza. We get the pizza from there. It's great. It's cheesy. It's bready. My wife is a pizza snob. She is born in Long Island. She thinks the only way to do pizza is the way that New Yorkers do pizza. And she loves their pizza. The other thing they do is they make like sandwiches. So like they'll do a meatball sandwich. But the thing is, the bread is actually pizza crust. So it's like pizza dough, I mean. So like they actually cook their sandwiches in pizza dough. And it's really good. So we get what I do is I get the meatball sandwich, but I get it without the sauce, because the sauce can get really make the bread soggy. And so I get it cooked without the sauce, and this is the mozz and all that. And then I just kind of pour the sauce on when I'm ready to eat it. But their sandwiches are really good, and really good people, a local place, mom and her son are the main ones that run it. Really good people, really good pizza. So if you're in town this weekend, do Polito's. Definitely do Polito's. Great pizza. Again, it's not the ambiance. They don't have like Notre Dame stuff all over like Rocco's, but if you're talking about a good pizza place and supporting a local business, definitely want to do Polito's. That's my place to be. Anytime we're over on that part of town, Ryan, like sometimes if I need to, go buy some new ammo, there's like a place over there. I'll just like, oh, honey, I'm going to go over there. Why? Because it's right by Polito's. Oh, well, I'm over there. I might as well go ahead and get Polito's, right? And take some Polito's home. So I'm always looking for excuses to get over there, but it's that kind of place. It's a really good place. So safe travels coming in, by the way. And then Ryan, of course, that's a good advice for you and the fam when you're in town this weekend, if you guys are looking for either one of those things as well.
I'm taking mental notes right now, man.
Yes, there you go. There you go.
Yep.
Getting the mental reps on food. All right. C-Mac asks, goes, Brian, I know Spindler hasn't played, but we've seen Luggan, Kristovic, and Carell. And when does he stand just play the young O-line? So I want to say two things about this.
Yep.
Because there's a lot of comments from the chat. And it was expected, right? I mean, that's just kind of what it is. And I love the passion that people have, because their passion is why they come back and watch the show every day. But I also think that we need to be a little cautious about making overreactions one way or the other from a game. And we said this before the game. We said, win or lose, don't overreact too much to a game. And did the offensive line disappoint? Heck yes. There's no spin here. There's no justification for how they played. They played bad. It's end of statement. There's no buts. There's nothing. They played bad. Right? Now, the but comes from big picture, but it was one game. Right? And so if they come out against Marshall, Ryan, and they still don't play well, or relative to the competition, then that's a problem. But I'm not overreacting, because here's the thing, for especially for like Lug and especially Carell, he earned this job over the course of a whole offseason.
Yes.
And so one bad game should not be, okay, you're out, unless he doesn't respond to that bad game well. And this is what we talked about this weekend. If he comes out and he's kind of moping and in his feelings and sad and, not practicing well, okay, dude, you got to get out of here, right? Like, you can't have you in the lineup. But as long as he mentally responds well, he's mad at himself, but he's like, I got to fix these mistakes, and goes out and puts in the work, that's where you stick with it right now. Are all those guys kind of being put on notice? Yes, they should all be put on notice. But from everything we've been told, there wasn't really a close competition for that next spot.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're just not going to make a change because of one bad game. Now, over the next 3 games, I am really wanting to see what these guys do, because I will be willing to make a change going into BYU if guys don't play better, if I'm Harry Hiestand.
Yep.
Maybe even going into North Carolina if guys aren't playing better. Like, especially because, like you said, Ryan, these aren't rookies.
Yep.
These aren't sophomores. Like, if Joe Alt and Blake Fisher played poorly, I could have been like, you know what? I don't like it. It's not good. But, Blake, that was his 3rd career start. I mean, if you think about Blake Fisher, his 3 starts are Florida State, Jermaine Johnson, 1st-round pick, Oklahoma State, and Ohio State. That kid's been thrown to the fire. I want to see what he does against someone who he's clearly the far superior player against. Yep. I want to see him step up and play well. But you could expect it from them. There's no excuse for Kristofic and especially Carell and Lugg to play as poorly as they did. None. And so I want to see them play better. Now, if they don't, I'm going to be willing to make a move relatively quickly.
You said put on notice, Brian. I think that's a perfect way to put it, right? You have 2 guys in that conversation that are 4th-year players, and another one that is a 6th-year player. Like it's you can't make excuses for it anymore. Like you can't. Like it's put up or shut up time. Like that's what it is, right? So the fact of the matter is that Jarrett Patterson is going to be back in the future, right? Like is it going to be for this game? Who knows? But either way, he is going to be back, and you have other talented players in the room. It's a trust thing at the end of the day too, right? I mean, because one thing that we need to not be too hyperbolic with is that we just watched one single football game, right? How many hours has Harry Hiestand spent with this offensive line throughout the spring, summer, and fall practice, right? Like he has seen these players on a day-to-day basis and seen the work they're putting in and their performance they're putting in on a daily basis. So there needs to be a part of you that says, hey, we maybe need to push back a little bit, take ourselves back, and let's evaluate another game. Let's see how things kind of move forward. But I agree with you. There has to be a notice on this one, right? Because like these guys are not first, like this isn't a redshirt freshman that just got his first start and he didn't look that great, right? Like there isn't a ton of time left for these guys, even though I know Carell's got 2 more years of eligibility after this one if he wanted to, but like these guys have to play good football or else there are other talented players. So put on notice, I think, is a good way to categorize this, but it's not let's just throw these guys to the curb. Like let's see it, right? Let's see how everything turns out over the next couple weeks.
And by the way, the AP top 25 did come out. I'm actually working on that story now. Notre Dame fell to 8th in the top 25. So that's actually not bad. It clearly shows that they have respect for what Notre Dame did.
Yes.
Clemson fell to 5th, which I thought was interesting. Ohio State fell to 3rd, but I have a feeling that had a lot more to do with how good Georgia looked than anything about them having an issue with how Ohio State played this weekend. So you also saw Florida go from unranked to 12th. Talk about overreactions from week 1. Pitt jumped into the top 25 after their sloppy win over West Virginia, which I find comical.
Keenan Slovis, baby.
Yeah.
Keep it moving.
NC State dropped 5 spots, which I understand. They barely beat East Carolina. Wake dropped a spot. Ole Miss. They all dropped spots because people jumped in. And then Tennessee jumped into the top 25. So Oregon went from 11th to out of the top 25. So very interesting. Very interesting. And I'm surprised Texas didn't jump in, to be completely honest with you. I thought Texas would have jumped in after a relatively convincing win, just to, if for anything else, just to set up a top 25 matchup this weekend against Alabama. Yep. So Notre Dame fell to 8th, which is a good place to be. Again, these rankings at the end of the day don't matter because these don't have any bearing on the college football playoff. But it is, perception-wise, it's still good to be a top 8 team because, you're going to see some teams ahead of you play each other at some point in time. You play one team ahead of you. And so, A&M plays Bama, for example. A&M is 6th. That's just hilarious. So actually, no, Pitt did not jump into the top 25. Excuse me. They just stayed put at 17. Sorry.
Texas A&M beat who? Sam Houston,
Sam
right?
Houston,
was it 30-0 or something like that?
Yeah, and it was an ugly 30-0, to be completely honest with you.
Yeah.
They weren't overly impressive. but they're usually not overly impressive, to be completely honest with you. So I'm not surprised by that. But yeah, so Notre Dame stayed 8th in the ranking, so that's a good thing. And just kind of looking through it now, Michigan State at 14, Arkansas jumped up 3 spots to 16. So yeah, interesting top 25. BYU did jump up 4 spots to 21 after a convincing win over South Florida. So that's the top 25, Ryan.
Nice.
And yeah, so I'll dive into the poll here. So I'm working on getting that article ready for Irish Breakdown. But again, just back to the point, is just overreacting positively, negatively, and positively. Like, okay, Clarence Lewis had a great game, but let's see, he's got to keep building on that, right? Like, Benjamin Morrison had a great game for rookie. He's got to build on it. Brandon Joseph's everybody's got to build on it. And then, do we think Isaiah Foskey's going to go through the year and have no sacks because he played bad in the opener? No, right? It's a game. Now, again, it's time to step up, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not making personnel changes based just on the performance on Saturday, unless the only exception is there's 2 exceptions. One, a kid emotionally doesn't handle his struggles correctly or well, or B, the competition was really, really close going in, and that was the thing that kind of might seal the deal for me, assuming that other kid even played. But in the offensive line, it's not like they put anybody else in the game. They didn't. Alan Watson asked Brian and Ryan, I keep seeing that the Irish start strong, but as soon as they get off script, first 20 plays, they seem to struggle rest of the game. Is that coaching not being able to adjust on the fly? I don't know if I necessarily agree with that premise. That was true early last year, but overall that hasn't been, in my opinion, the way. I mean, it certainly wasn't the way that Notre Dame played late last year, in my opinion.
Right. No, I don't really accept the premise either. I'm just trying to work through it in my head. Has there been a lot of situations where this has happened, Alan? I'm genuinely asking.
Early last season, it was something I complained a lot about.
Okay.
Yeah. At times last season early, you'd see that. But as the year went on, I kind of felt like Notre Dame kind of really finished well. I mean, they were much better in the second half against Purdue, I felt. You look at North Carolina, I thought they were kind of good on offense throughout the game. I thought that Stanford, they kind of did okay on the script, but then did pretty well off of it. So I don't think that's necessarily something that I would agree with the premise. I think, again, I think they just have to execute better. I mean, there was stuff that they did. They adjusted on the fly. It just they couldn't protect the quarterback and didn't complete passes.
I saw someone.
It's a problem.
Yeah. I saw someone say that it happened in the Fiesta Bowl. It wasn't 20 plays and then they fell off script.
Yeah,
they dominated the whole first half.
Right.
It wasn't just.
I mean, the only way that could have been is if they scored 4 touchdowns on the first 15 plays, which actually is kind of close. I mean,
right.
But the point is again, they adjusted. They just didn't execute. Look, the thing is, adjustments only work if you have stuff you can adjust to. And when your offensive line doesn't play well, ring a bell, then it's hard to make adjustments. And so to me, that's the big thing for me is I'm not ready to kind of jump into this whole, they didn't make adjustments and that's why they lost the game thing. It's like they lost the game because they didn't execute. And do they need to be more aggressive? Yeah, I actually think the script was the least aggressive part of what they did against Ohio State. So, I understand where you're coming from and there have been times for that, but I just don't think that's necessarily something I would agree with right now, with this particular team where they are. Meyer 03 asked, did Tommy suffer from trying to use every single weapon other than the wide receivers, obviously, versus committing to one that was working regarding Estime? I keep seeing people say that Estime was working. Estime had 21 yards on 9 carries. I think Audric Estime is going to be fine, but I'm not looking at Audric Estime's performance against Ohio State saying, gee, they should have gave him the rock more. I think that they should have given Chris Tyree the rock in different areas. I think the issue is usage. Neither guy was used overly well, in my opinion. So, I mean, Audric Estime led all the other running backs in reception and carries. So no, I don't think that the issue was that. I think the issue was I want to see the receivers getting the ball more. I want to see Chris Tyree getting chances on some of these counters and inside zone runs, not just on jet sweeps. I want to see him being used in the screen game and different things like that. So I think how guys were used was an issue. I don't view it as trying to use every single weapon because some weapons I don't think he used enough, to be honest with you. So I think the only guy that I thought they force-fed a little too much was Mayer. and I don't think they did enough to use him as a decoy. That's the thing I didn't like. There were things that they did. If they could have just used him a certain way, maybe you can open up somebody else. I didn't see that on Saturday.
I thought that they would be using Michael Mayer more as kind of that seam runner a little bit more, and that's kind of to your point, right? That's kind of like a clear route type of idea, right? But I also think that Michael Mayer could do more, just generally, as far as like being a seam runner and kind of threatening that area of the field, second and third levels. And for whatever reason, I felt like I just saw a bunch of sit routes, a bunch of curls,
I had him running one route beyond 10 yards the entire game. He ran a backside seam route at one point, and that's the only route that I charted him running more than 10 yards.
And like, I get it to a degree, Brian, because Michael Mayer is a good yak guy, right? Like, he can break some tackles and do all that type of stuff. But we just talked about this whole offseason. I mean, and I think the staff has talked about it a little bit, the fact of like, Michael Mayer can do more than just being a, underneath threat. Like, he needs to be a seam guy. He needs to work. Because what were we talking about? I know that it ended up not coming to fruition. That I thought that I didn't think the linebackers for Ohio State were overly impressive going into the game. Now, obviously, Eichenberg had a good football game. Didn't really notice Steel Chambers a ton, at least kind of just off of my viewing. But I feel like there was stuff that you could have taken advantage of those guys in the passing game as far as in the seams and working over the middle of the field. And I just honestly did not think that Notre Dame did enough to kind of take advantage of that, and that goes from the Michael Mayer aspect. And also, I thought we were going to see a Chris Tyree on an angle route or an option route in the passing game. And like, you just didn't see it. I'm a little confused on why, I thought that Notre Dame was going to be able to stress the second level a lot more. And for whatever reason, that just was not the case in this matchup against Ohio State.
Yep. And then his follow-up question is, am I the only one that with the impression that Buckner wanted to let it rip more? No, I don't think you're definitely not the only one. Cause I think you could kind of sometimes see Tyler was a little frustrated, which I think also is kind of maybe why a couple of the throws he forced. Cause it's like, I'm not getting a lot of chances to make plays. So when I do, I need to do something with it. Yeah,
exactly.
And I think that's putting more on a kid than asking him to do more, where he knows, hey, I'm going to get chances. I need to make plays, but I'm going to get chances to make plays. Yep. He knew he needed to make plays, and he didn't get a lot of chances to do it. A lot of chances. He got some, and he didn't make some. But that's kind of the thing for me is I want to see him get. Look, he's a gunslinger, right, to a degree. Like, and I understand you don't necessarily want to be that all the time, So I get why they did it to a degree. It's like you can understand something and still
not agree with it,
like it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So,
well, that's like my wife makes a good point sometimes, and I'm like, nope, I still don't accept it. I'm sorry. Like you made a solid point though, but like good case, but nope, still don't accept it. Sorry, honey. But I mean, Brian, I mean, I agree with you 100%. Because you want to talk about putting too much stress on a first, well, not a first year player, but a first time starter. He's trying to be too perfect, right? And I felt like that there were a lot of cases in that. Like there were a couple balls that I thought he forced. We talked about, I don't think we talked about it much, but like he overthrew Lorenzo Styles was open down the right sideline for
on a wide fade.
He overthrew him, and there wasn't even that much pressure on that play. And that's honestly a play where I just think
he actually got hit on that play.
Did he get hit on that play?
Yeah, he got hit on that play. He got drilled. Now, again, he still got to go through the completion route. I mean, if anything, if you get hit, the ball should be underthrown, right? Sure. But he's got to hit that, right? I mean, that's going to be part of the growing up process. But he did get hit. That was my only point. He did get hit.
Gotcha. But I still think regardless, there were some throws where I thought it was a little telegraphed. I thought it was a little forced. Like it was, and that stuff again, if you're only going to get X amount of throws, you're trying to make the most out of your plays. And that's not how you want to be as a quarterback sometimes. Right. Like it's just, you want to play loose. And I feel like they didn't let Tyler Buckner play loose. That was my biggest criticism of them.
Yep. Let's go to some more questions here. We do have some questions rolling in here. We have one from We Are Not Marshall. Brian and Ryan, why the training wheels from Reese? Oh, was he seeing this that warranted this game? What was he seeing that warranted this game plan? I mean, we've talked about this a lot, Ryan. I don't know. We don't know the answer to that, right? We've talked about it before. This is not a typical time of Reese game plan. This is what we saw in the bowl game. It's not what we saw against Stanford. It's not what we saw against Georgia Tech, Navy, North Carolina, Ohio State. It's just not a typical Florida State last year. Marcus Freeman has said publicly he dictated how they wanted to do it because he wanted the offense to be used a way to protect the defense. That's just what the head coach said that he wanted. Now, is that the head coach protecting his staff? I don't know. We'll find out. And so, look, let's see what he does against Marshall and Cal and North Carolina and BYU. And we're really not going to know the answer to this again until we get to the Clemson game.
Yes.
Because if you felt that way against, I just want to see it. I want to see it. So we can talk about toward blue in the face. I can speculate all we want. We've said everything that needs to be said about that. I don't know the answer. You don't know the answer. Ryan doesn't know the answer. Marcus Freeman has said it was on him. Is that him being honest or is that him protecting his staff? We don't know the answer to that. Let's see what they do moving forward. All I know is this. Whatever your opinion is of Tommy Rees, we all know for a fact that we have seen big games with Tommy Rees as the OC where he was not like that. Going back to Clemson in 2020, both times, because they were very aggressive both times they played Clemson in 2020 with Trevor Lawrence a quarterback. He was taking shots down the field early in 2020 in the regular season. They were aggressive. I mean, they got into scoring zone on the first 3 drives against Clemson in 2020 in the ACC title game. Now, they didn't execute when they got down there, but we've never seen this type of lack of aggressiveness from him in a big game, except for last year or 2 years ago against Alabama and this Saturday against Ohio State. And it had a very similar feel, which is kind of a little bit of a bad taste in my mouth. So, but again, one game, I'm not going to try to just say, see, Freeman's just like Brian Kelly. That would be irrational and stupid. Let's see how it goes forward. Let's see if they learn their lessons from it and say, you know what? Yeah, we kept Ohio State's points down, but we still lost. So in this example that I've always said, Ryan, you know my stance on this, playing keep away means a 31-20 loss turned into a 21-10 loss. But you don't win those games because you play keep away. You still got to score when you get the ball.
Right.
And whether that's 6 possessions or 9 possessions, you still got to stop them when you get the ball. And Notre Dame had chances to put Ohio State down, and they didn't do it. And when Ohio State had chances to put Notre Dame down, they did. And that's the difference in this game. And as I said the other night, I gained a ton of respect for C.J. Stroud because he did not play well. But when the game was on the line, he did what he needed to do. And so he went up on my book. He went up in my book.
And honestly, that was my biggest concern with CJ Stroud going into the year from an NFL draft perspective is like, looks good in structure, goes through his reads, all that good stuff. But he didn't seem really make a ton of plays outside of structure. He killed Notre Dame in the fourth quarter, man, working outside the pocket and hitting the passes down the sideline. He looked good in the big moments. There's no doubt about it. But I mean, the question here again, I just want to reiterate that I don't know what Tommy Rees' thought process is. I'm not going to, judge a person based upon that. And again, time will tell the true story here, right? And if it is a Marcus Freeman, just wanted to play a certain brand of football, then guess what, guys? Marcus Freeman's also learning on the job, right? Like this is his first true game as the head coach. I'm not counting the Oklahoma State game. We got a question about that yesterday. I don't count the Oklahoma State game. This was the first real game as a head coach, in my estimation, in my opinion, and he's learning how to be a head coach still. So let's give it some time.
I do count Oklahoma State in some regards. The thing that I think we've learned about Marcus Freeman in his first 2 games is there's 2 things, and he said it. He said the negative on yesterday. We got to finish. He said it after the game. He said it 15 times. We got to finish, and his team has not finished. In 2 games against top 10 opponents, Ohio State and Oregon and Oklahoma State, Ryan, they have led for about 80 of those 120 minutes of those games. Yeah. They lost both of them. They got to finish. But here's the thing that we also learned. And this is something I do think we can take away from the Oklahoma State game because he was the head coach, even though the staff wasn't there, Ryan. They were mentally and emotionally ready to play both games.
Right.
They weren't afraid of the moment. They weren't afraid of the opponent. They didn't execute the way they needed to execute, and they weren't able to adjust and make the right moves. The players didn't make the plays that they needed to do to win the games, but they put them in position. So that's a much better place to be than they have been in the past, where they weren't even competitive in these games more often than not. And so that's a positive sign if you're looking for positive signs. But again, you're not considered a success at Notre Dame because you were really emotionally, mentally ready to play in your loss.
Right.
You're judged at Notre Dame by being emotionally and mentally ready to play and then winning, and that's the thing that Marcus Freeman has to learn. And I'm really curious to see how Notre Dame reacts after they beat Marshall on Saturday, and we fully expect them to beat Marshall on Saturday. So I'm saying, but if they do in that situation, how does this team react? I wonder if there's almost kind of like get that monkey off your back and now just go play, get that win and then just go play. And that's going to be interesting. It's going to be very, very interesting to see how that goes. All right, let's go to some more. We have a lot more. We have a super chat down here from Michael S. He goes, "Did Harry Hiestand in the past have replaced players during a season for bad play? How did it work out?" Yeah, we've seen that. The 2014 offensive line got completely overhauled. I can't remember who I think Connor Hanratty got pulled out, but they had Nick Martin at center. If you remember that year, Ryan, they had Christian Lombard at guard and Steve Elmer at tackle. And then it just wasn't working. So he moved Elmer back to guard, kicked Lombard back out to tackle, moved Nick Martin to left guard because he was having some issues with his wrist, and then inserted Matt Hegarty in the starting lineup. And I thought the offensive line played pretty well down the stretch. Now, the team didn't play well in late 2014. But if you remember that year, Notre Dame rushed for 99 yards against Louisville. That's because they had that play where like they snapped the ball and it went like 30 yards over Everett Golson's head. You remember that? But Torian Folston rushed for over 100 yards that game. And he was one of only two backs all year to rush for over 100 yards against Louisville. And if my memory serves me correctly, the only two running backs to go over 100 yards against Louisville that year were Dalvin Cook and Duke Johnson, along with Torian Folston. So, and then, of course, they went out in the bowl game, and then he put McGlinchey in the starting lineup for the bowl game. And obviously they did really well. But they went for over 200 yards against Navy. They went for over 200 yards against Northwestern. They didn't run the ball a lot against Arizona State because they fell behind so quickly that they couldn't run the ball. But I thought and then the first play of the game against USC, Josh Adams rips off a 70-yard run, if you remember that. But again, they just kind of fell behind and couldn't get it going. But so we saw it then. We saw him make that change then. There have been times when he's done it, but honestly, 2016, I remember Colin McGovern struggled early at guard and he put Mark Harrell in. Yeah. And Mark Harrell played better. So we have seen him do that before when it's necessary. But honestly, his lines usually don't play to the level where he needed to make a replacement of somebody. But yes, he has done it before, including moving guys around from positions when things weren't working. So it's not completely abnormal.
He'll make a change if he needs to make a change. That's like kind of the point blank to it. But let's hope this offensive line develops and takes a step forward. So.
And Michael also had a super chat. Says Marcus said yesterday the problem with the O-line was youth. It is not like the BK excuse you used last year. Yeah, it was. I didn't like to hear that. But as he went to explain it, he made it clear. He was talking about the youth was the tackles. And he's right. They're true sophomores. Blake Fisher made his third career start. He was more referring to it from an experience standpoint of starts. And he went on to explain it because the only guy that started Saturday, that had more than 10 career starts was Josh Luck. Now, is that an excuse that I'm accepting? No, it's not. You should have played better. I'm sorry. I'm not buying that because you are seniors. But he said youth, but as he went on to explain, he was talking about experience. But either way, it's not an excuse that I'm buying. But yes, it is very much so. Here's the difference, however, or here's not the difference. Here's the question that we have to learn about Marcus Freeman. Is he saying those things to protect his team and players, but then behind closed doors saying, not good enough? That's the difference. Brian Kelly would say those things to justify him and his decisions and his poor play and to protect himself. I want to see what's true. So, Ryan, I mean, look, end of the day, I don't care what he says publicly. I care about what you do privately. The reason Brian Kelly's comments bothered me is because that's also what we knew that he was doing behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And he wasn't making changes behind the scenes. So to your point, Michael, yes, that's not a thing that I like to hear. But I just don't know enough about Marcus Freeman yet to know because there were things he said on Saturday where he was clearly protecting his coaches, but you could tell he was pissed.
Sure.
Right. And so that's what we don't know about him yet. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay if you're someone who says things like that in public, because I'm not throwing my coaches under the bus and the players, because we used to always get pissed about Brian Kelly doing that too, right? Like, it wasn't my fault. It was Sam Mustafer's fault, and it was the quarterback's fault. It was this guy's fault. And it was the defense's fault or whatever else. It was never his fault. So
Brian Kelly continued that trend after the LSU game.
I didn't listen to his press conference. Was it bad?
It wasn't terrible, but it was the same thing about we need to play better, and not really mentioning the coaching aspect of anything, which is fantastic.
Sure. It's always the players. Mm-hmm. All right. Speaking of, Robert Bishop asks, how's BK feeling today? Anyone think that seat is a tad warm already? I don't know how LSU fans reacted to that game. Right. I didn't listen to any of their stuff, so I couldn't tell you.
I'll say this. I did see in a particular YouTube video that is like an LSU based one, Brian, and it seemed like a lot of LSU fans were not very happy after that loss. So I don't know if that's the full pulse of the fan base, but it definitely didn't seem like they were particularly happy. And honestly, I was surprised that you didn't post that. What was that? The SEC short video or whatever that you sent us last.
It was on the board. Somebody already put it on the board. Yeah,
I missed it on the board.
Yeah,
so yeah. So,
but that was hilarious.
I don't think the fan base is overly pleased with the start, because I think, again, there were clear coaching issues during that game.
Sure,
right? It wasn't where you were just like, okay, their guys just aren't as good as Florida State's guys. Like, that wasn't the issue during that game.
No,
it was the special teams blunders and mismanagement of the clock and different stuff like that. Like those were the issues during that game. So I definitely think that the general pulse, I think, is that LSU was not happy, but they're going to chalk it up to, but it's just one game. So
yeah, and then I did see one thing. Somebody sent me one thing where one of the guys was like saying something like, they had all these mistakes and still almost won. I'm like, man, have we not heard that for a million times over the last 12 years? It's impressive that they only lost by one when they fumbled 2 punts and had a field goal blocked and an extra point blocked.
Dropped
and blah,
2
blah,
passes.
blah, blah, blah. Yeah. I'm like, okay, heard that before. Best coaching job ever for a coach that can have that much go wrong and still almost win. So
there's going to be a lot of almost wins in LSU's future.
That's what I said yesterday, Ryan. I tried to warn them. They didn't want to listen. They got in their feelings and didn't want to listen. Alan Watson, Brian Ryan, coaching question. You ever have a guy that practices badly but plays well, or is practice warrior but not a gamer? I've never had a guy that practiced badly that played great, because I will never play a guy who's a bad practice player. I can't justify it. Now, I have had some players that weren't great practice guys for different reasons. I had a kid, I've shared this before, Ryan, I had a receiver at Duquesne named Michael Warfield, who he was a really weird athlete in that he was really tightly wound and he couldn't get loose in practice. And I'd always be looking like, where's Michael? And he's over there laying down with a trainer stretching him out because he just couldn't get loose. And so, he was good in practice. So he wasn't great. He didn't strike me as a star, but he was like, okay, he's one of my best 3. And so we're going to start him. And he was our backside guy. Well, he goes out in the first game of the year against Bucknell and he makes big plays. And then we go out to the next year. I think we played Butler in week 2 and he just dominates. And it was like, okay, this guy's a gamer. Right. And then we had another kid on that team who was really good in practice. It was just good in games, but not great in games. And then I had a kid at Christopher Newport named Nathan Davis, who just couldn't lock in and practice. I mean, he wasn't a great practice player because he wasn't a great athlete, Ryan. But when the lights were on, the kid was just great. But they were both okay practice players. They were never bad practice players.
Right.
So I could never justify. I've always said, look, okay, I get that Phil Dracovich's not a great practice player, but you still got to play. He wasn't bad in practice. Just wasn't great in practice. What I've seen more is guys who are like people have. I had somebody say this. Ian Book was considered a gamer. No, Ian Book is exactly what Alan just said. He was a star in practice. That was never the same player in games. But that's my experience. I don't know what yours is like.
Mine's more the latter, Alan, on this one. I've had a lot of guys that look like Tarzan but play like Jane, if I'm being completely honest. Like, they would look so good in practice. Brian, as a high school coach, the biggest thing that I had, though, was during summer practice, or before the fall would start, before you're in pads, you would see these kids, right, working out and doing all that type of stuff where you're like, oh, that guy might be a dude, man. He might be a dude. And then you put the pads on, you're like, nope, not a dude. Because you can tell, like, you could tell, run that way very fast, do this, run this drill this certain way, and they would look fantastic doing it. But then once they got in a game, it was just like it just wasn't there, like they didn't process the game at all.
Half speed heroes, baby.
Yeah,
Practice
man.
All Americans.
Oh gosh, yes. And then you would have the kids on scout team. I'm going to vent for a second. The kid on scout team where you run a play, you run it incorrectly. Run the same play over again, and then the kids, instead of doing their assignment, will run right to where the ball is going, and you're like, okay, practice hero right there. So yeah, it was a frustrating thing from high school because I coached at a lower level in high school too. The same team I actually played for in high school, and you would have a glimmer of hope one time, where, oh, wow, that kid might be a dude. And then wasn't a dude. And it's very unfortunate. Very unfortunate.
Yep. No doubt. I used to always, it's like, oh man, this guy looks like, or you see that kid, like when I first get to a school, you'd see this kid, you're like, wow, I was like, how'd that kid end up here? How's that kid at a 1AA school or a D3 school? And you're like, he's 6'4". And then you watch him play and you're like, oh, I get it.
My first year when I was at Frostburg State playing, there was a freshman defensive lineman that year who was literally no exaggeration, 6'8" plus and 320 pounds. And it was a good 320 pounds. And Brian, I saw him dunk a basketball jumping off of one leg. And I was like, oh man. But then you saw him play and you're like, oh, it's not very good. That makes sense. But like off the field, you're like, ooh, I was like, wow, I'm playing D3 football, but I think we got an SEC kid that could come out through the cracks. But nope, not very good football player. Not very good.
Not at all. Next question. That was a really good question. Siggy13 says, Brian and Ryan, do you get the feeling that this Ohio State performance by Notre Dame on offense was more about Notre Dame overthinking it, or is this the team's ability? I don't think I can watch that play calling 11 more times. There's no way Tommy Rees calls games like that. I mean, again, was it bad? Yes, but we just don't have hardly any history of him calling games like that.
Yeah.
Right. So I mean, again, we have no history of it. Marcus Freeman said that's the game plan he wanted for this game against Ohio State. Now we're going to find out if that's Ohio State specific or if there's more to it, Ryan. And, for me, I think it was Ohio State specific. And so I think the former of what he said, and I think it's the former is the first one, right? I always get those backwards. The first one is where it is, where I think they overthought it a little bit. Right. Or maybe took it too far. Like I understand the premise, but they went too far with it a little bit, in my opinion.
I think there's two sides to this. And one of them for me is not the lack of team talents. Right. I think that it's two things. One, I think they overthought it a little bit. Right. Like I think that they may have limited themselves in some areas. And then also, can we for a second give Ohio State some credit? Like they played really well in certain areas that they were not great at last year. Right. Like, so I think you have to give the opponent some credit. And then you also have to say, but also Notre Dame didn't help themselves in this area, right? Like I do not think it's a lack of talent. I think it was a lack of trust in a lot of areas. And I think that it was a lack of also Ohio State played a good football game. Like, let's give them credit, man. They
fought
defensively, and from an offensive line perspective, Ohio State was a much better team than I anticipated in the first game of the season. I was on the same wavelength with you. I thought later into the season, middle to late of the season, I was like, oh, well, that Ohio State offensive line is going to be a lot better. That defense is going to be a lot better. Cool. Did not expect the storm to happen in the first game where they looked that good on both lines. Like it just was different for me.
Yep. Agree. Laker Irish asked, does the rise of Mickey and Morrison mean the sophomore class is squeezed out? It's in the process of happening. I mean, are they squeezed out in regard to the roster? I don't take the question that way. I'm taking the question that way of just out of competition for starting jobs. Well, I think there's something to that, honestly. I mean, they didn't turn to Ryan Barnes or Philip Riley or Chance Tucker when Cam Hart needed a breather or was struggling or injured, because Cam was not 100% on Saturday. They turned to Benjamin Morrison and Jaden Mickey. So, yeah, and I think that means those guys passed him up. Now, again, it's one game. Perhaps those guys were just the matchups they liked for this game. We'll find out, right? But it would seem to be the case. And I'm not overly surprised because they've been cross-training Ryan Barnes, and you can't beat out Benjamin Morrison if you're cross-training. But the other part is, like, I'm not this is kind of I told you so. I'll say it. I've been trying to tell y'all for a long time. Benjamin Morrison was not a top 300 guy. He was way better than that. Way better than that. I've been saying all along, this is a top 100 kid, Ryan. I've been saying this from day one. This is a dude. Alabama does not go out to freaking Arizona to recruit corners who aren't dudes. I'm sorry. They just don't. And that's a team that Bama wanted Benjamin Morrison. Washington wanted Benjamin Morrison when Jimmy Lake was there. And Jimmy Lake puts a lot of corners into the NFL. It's one thing he definitely does. So the kid was always better than the rankings. I still never understand it. Well, he didn't go to camps. Do you not have film? Do you not watch games anymore? Like, do games not matter anymore? That is a dude. I've been telling people this. I graded him as a top 100 recruit. I graded him as a 5-star upside. And even I'm shocked that he was that way in game 1 against Ohio State. Like, yeah. I'm surprised that it was that quick. But he is a dude. He is an absolute dude.
Now, he played great. I mentioned this a little bit earlier about George Takis, but I had an agent buddy message me and say, who's number 20 on Notre Dame? I'm like, true freshman,
Did you say
man. You gotta wait a little
buddy?
bit. Yes, an agent buddy was like, who's number 20, man?
I really thought we were about to have a talk. I thought at first I couldn't. Did he say agent buddy or Asian buddy? I was like, hold on a second. Let's make sure we specify.
A sports agent texted me and said, who's number 20? He looks like the best defensive back on the team. And I was like, he's only a freshman, man. You got to wait a couple years for this guy.
Yes. Back off, buddy. Back off.
Yes. Apparently somebody else heard Asian buddy in the chat as well.
I honestly was like, hold on a second. I want to make sure that that's said correctly so we don't get a strike against us.
No.
Yes. Agent buddy. He's long, he's athletic, but the thing we saw on Saturdays, he's really smart. He's instinctive. He just has a feel for the game.
Seems confident,
and he's a pretty tough kid too for a freshman. He's a skinny freshman and he played physical. But I thought the way he undercut that in route that he almost picked, that's a veteran move. Mm-hmm. Like, you just don't see that. And again, we shouldn't be overly shocked because his dad played in the NFL, but also was a really good player at Arizona as a defensive back. Mm-hmm. But he's a really good football player, Ryan. Really good football player.
And it's not even just the fact of, seeing the in cut and kind of being proactive with it. It's also the ability to make a decision to make the move,
and then have the speed to close on it.
Yes,
I mean, that's the other thing. So
all parts were impressive on that play.
We had in our intel piece before the summer, we had a piece about Benjamin Morrison and how good he looked. And that intel piece came from an offensive person. So I was like, okay, well, we'll see. But yeah, it looks like it was legit. And I had another really good buddy who's a source who texted me. I swear to you, he texted me. I think I told you this, Ryan, about a week and a half ago before the game. And he said, what I'm hearing from the people I know around the team is that the secondary could be the best part of the defense. And I said, dude, no.
Right.
But for the opener, it definitely was. And if that proves true the rest of the year, most likely that's going to be a really good sign for Notre Dame. Yeah. If this is a repeatable performance, this team is going to be really good.
I agree.
Really good. Because
if Notre Dame starts improving in the spots that we thought were going to be strengths and they carried what we thought may be a little bit of a weakness, then yeah, man, I agree completely. If that secondary is as good as they looked in the game 1, then you're going to be in a good spot. You're going to be in a really good spot when it matters most.
No doubt. All right, next question from Jay Henry. What's a good number of pass yards for Buckner for you guys to feel comfortable with the offense versus Marshall? Jay, I don't know if I can give you numbers. I think for me, it would just be, if he only throws for 230 yards because he's out of the game by halftime, you know what I mean? Like then I don't know if that would be fair, but if he plays at least 3 quarters, Ryan, I got to think at least 250 yards. But the thing for me that I want to see more of, even more so than yards, I want to see a yards per attempt around 9 in a game like this. That's where I want to be. And I want to see the ball getting thrown down the field a little bit and successfully down the field a little bit is something that I want to see from this game. So because he can throw for over 300 yards and it not necessarily be impressive.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Like, again, if he throws the 3-yard crossing route and Lorenzo Styles breaks 9 tackles because the other team's not good, like Javon McKinley did to New Mexico, then that those yards don't impress me. You know what I mean? I care more about how it looks and how it's executed than I do more so the yards.
I agree. I think that there is, again, like I've been calling for the RPO, right? If he just throws a bunch of RPOs and it's like that crazy number, like, okay, cool type of thing, right? But I think that this is a game where you're going to have opportunities to create explosive plays. I think that, I mean, I have to think that Marshall is going to say, okay, we have a good second level of defense. We got to stop the run. Like that's going to be a thing that I believe, especially after seeing that game where you're just like, okay, they're struggled to throw the ball at points. And I think that there's going to be a lot of one-on-one opportunities. There's going to be a lot of explosive play opportunities, and Tyler Buchner needs to make those. I mean, he does, because this is a big thing, Brian, because again, it's Marshall, but this could be a confidence builder for a quarterback, man. Like this could be a game where it's just like, oh, okay, I can do this. And then the next week you get a little better. The next week after that, you get a little better. And then you lead up into a BYU or a Clemson, whatever the case may be, where you need Tyler Buchner to open things up. Like it's a necessity now, not just a luxury at that point. So I think that this could be a big week to start building that confidence. Let's build it.
Get to the next question. Robert Bishop, do you guys think Florida is for real or Tennessee? I predicted Florida to win that game because what I kept saying to people is last year was the anomaly year. That was the team that was in the SEC title the year before, and the 2 previous years was a top 10 team in a major bowl game. Now, is Florida going to challenge Georgia for the SEC East? No. So they're not for real in that regard. But they are definitely a top 25 team talent-wise, Ryan. And I'm not surprised that they beat Utah, who I said is I'm just not impressed with. However, what I will say is I actually did like how Utah played on Saturday. They battled. Florida just had better players, which is what I expected it to be. And Florida needed a crazy ending at the end to win the game. So I actually came out of that game with more respect for Utah than I had going in, to be completely honest. Again, it was like Notre Dame. They were not overwhelmed by the moment. They were not overwhelmed by the crowd or Florida's speed. They just got beat by a better team.
Yes.
And props to them for. So I actually came away more impressed with Utah than I did. But that's exactly what I expected Florida to be. They're athletic. They can run it. And Anthony Richardson's really talented athletically. Now, there's still some things he's got to develop with his game, but he's a really physically talented kid. And as he gets more experience, which he should have got last year, you know what I mean? Then he's going to be a really good player. But when you've got a dynamic quarterback like that who can just like the game winner was not, oh, great play call, coach. It was, well, that guy's really talented. You know what I mean? You know, that's what it was.
Man. He did a few of those during that game too, man, where it's just like break 2 tackles, spin out of a sack, like, and just throw an absolute laser shot, right? I mean, that was my biggest thing about Dan Mullen, Brian, was like, okay, you lost the team. Everybody was, just kind of packed it in. Why was Emory Jones playing so much? Like, I just don't understand. Especially after the season went derailed. Why are we still trotting out Emory Jones? Like, why does Anthony Richardson only get 1 start last year? Like, it doesn't make any sense.
My only thought, and I don't buy it, my only thought all along was maybe he felt like because the team was so bad that he was afraid that Anthony could lose confidence if he's out there getting his butt kicked every Saturday.
Sure.
Even then, it's kind of like, I don't buy it. I'm like, that's the only somewhat acceptable excuse. But I never thought they were actually that bad. They weren't actually that bad where that would have been a good excuse. So I don't get it, Ryan. I really don't get it.
Florida's always one of those teams that's going to have talent. Like, there's never going to be an absence of talent because they're in a hotbed, right? And they're going to recruit and they're going to do all that type of stuff. And I know you could say that, maybe the previous coaching staff didn't recruit as well as you would want at a University of Florida. And that's fair. I accept that.
Relative to their standards, correct.
Yes, to their standards, 100%. And especially when you are where you are located in the country, there's not an excuse to not recruit at a higher level. So I accept that with Dan Mullen. But that being said, there's still some really good talent on Florida. I think you saw that on Saturday, right? Like, Utah is a good team. Tavion Thomas is a tough runner. Cam Rising is a good football player. Clark Phillips is a good football player. Like, there is a lot of good football players on that Utah team, but I think there's just more depth and more talent overall on a Florida team. I picked Utah because I thought the experience factor might be the kind of the kicker for them to being the more successful team. But I'll say this, Brian, I have always accepted that Anthony Richardson is a stupidly talented player. I mean, 6'4", 230 something that can run and it has that type of arm. One thing that I loved in that game from him is he was very confident, man. Like,
Yes.
he did not flinch in the pocket. I'm like, oh, okay, this kid's got some moxie to him too. And as he continues to improve, just a little technical aspects of from a footwork perspective and an accuracy perspective, there is a good, I think, a really good baseline, because if you're a confident player, then you can play, like you can play, especially when you have that type of talent. So I was overly impressed by Anthony Richardson, man.
Yeah.
The hype that we've heard this offseason showed a lot of it during that game, man. He made some plays that you just can't teach at the end of the day.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. Next question. In Tennessee, I mean, let's see Tennessee play somebody good first, right? I mean, with all due respect, beating Ball State 59-10 doesn't show me anything. I think Tennessee is going to be a top 25 team. I said they were a sleeper team before the year, but what I hate is when people take things that prove, that they have a confirmation bias, and it's like, yeah, that's not the kind of outcome you should be using that confirmation bias for. Beating Ball State 59-10 does not all of a sudden prove that I'm right about Tennessee. I'm sorry. You could be a 7-5 SEC team and still beat Ball State 59-10. I'm sorry.
Yes.
So I need to see them beat somebody good. We'll learn. I'll know a lot more about Tennessee after this weekend when they play at Pitt than we did after the opener.
I have a take, Brian. I don't know if this is a game that we're going to pick this week, the Tennessee Pitt game. So maybe I shouldn't say this out loud, but I think Tennessee's going to roll Pitt this week. Like, absolutely roll them. They are.
Shock me.
Tennessee has a lot of talent, man. Like, they really are. Like I like Hendon Hooker a ton. I think that he's really fallen into a great situation. Jamari Small is a good running back. They have the wide receiver that's name escaping me right now, the longer kid, but he's a really talented football player. Cedric Tillman. Yep. Yeah. Cedric Tillman's a really good football player. They have some experience that has come back on that offensive line. Jerome Carvin and the right kid that plays, left tackle, right tackle type of player. And they have a defense with Jeremy Banks and a few other players that I'm just like, this is a good team. Tyler Barron at defensive end. Like, it's a very talented football team. So I think that Tennessee rolls Pitt this week. I really do. I think they are going to be a tough out in the SEC this year.
Agree. But I think we both also agree that let's see them do it against somebody good. Florida did it against somebody good. Let's see Tennessee do that. But I think that's the battle for two in that division. That's the battle for two, with all due respect to Kentucky. But again, now Florida's got to say, okay, that's a great win. Now, how do you handle success? Mm-hmm. That's something we got to learn, and that's something we're going to learn a lot about Notre Dame. When we said this during the offseason, we're going to learn how Notre Dame bounces back from defeat, or how they handle success. Well, Notre Dame's got to prove they can bounce back from defeat. Florida's got to go show that they can handle success, because now they had a great win this weekend. Okay, but you got a good Kentucky team coming into your home field this week. Can you now build on that success? Because if they can start the season 2-0 with wins over two ranked opponents, I mean, Billy Napier is going to build himself up a lot of love down in Gainesville in a hurry.
You mentioned Will Levis. He looked pretty good week one. Again, not against a great team. You know who looked really good in week one, Brian? And this is going to, like, I know you're going to be like, oh, okay, makes sense, because he had a great game against Notre Dame in the final game of the year. Spencer Sanders looked fantastic in week one, man. I watched the film on him, Brian, and he looks like a completely different player, man. Like, he looks confident, comfortable in his own skin. And I mean, I don't think anybody's ever questioned the talent that Spencer Sanders has. Right. Like, the kid has a hose for an arm, but
no, it's never been about his ability. It's always about, can he read a defense? Can he throw on time? Can he make those plays? That's always been the question with him.
And I know it was Central Michigan, but he stacked back-to-back good games against Notre Dame and Central Michigan.
Wasn't Central Michigan weren't they a bowl team last year?
Yeah, they were.
I believe they were.
They were a decent team.
Again, so it's about understanding the quality of your opponent. I mean, Jim McElwain, I believe, is still their football coach, right?
Yes, I believe you are right. Yeah.
So, I mean, that's a decent football team that they went out and hung a lot on. Now, should they have given up as many points as they did? Heck no. Because I remember Ryan was like, dude, I can't believe they gave up 16 points to Central Michigan at halftime. And I was texting him a little bit. I was like, dude, it got worse. You were mad about 16.
It was like 58-46 final or something like that. Yeah. It was
but I mean, they were a 9-4 team last year. Had a somewhat competitive loss to Missouri, lost to LSU on the road, lost to Miami, and lost to Northern Illinois by a point. They had a good win over Toledo last year. Beat Western Michigan at Western Michigan convincingly, beat Ball State convincingly, and then went into a bowl game and beat Washington State in a bowl game. So that's a good football team that Jim McElwain's building. They're fundamentally sound. They're tough. They're like his Florida teams were.
Yep.
Fundamentally sound and tough. It just not schemed overly well at Florida, which was his problem, but there was never a lack of toughness. But I think Florida too is, as I said, Ryan, getting rid of Todd Grantham was the thing that was going to be the thing that's going to turn them around. And Dan Mullen's inability to make that move is why Dan Mullen is currently unemployed as a football coach.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what you got to do. Mr. Shaughnessy, Brian Ryan, do we see the younger players this weekend? Hope so. I want to see the backers. They need to.
Yes.
They need to. What was it you that asked? No, it was Sean asked me before the show, Ryan. Sean Davis called me after they got done recording there. So he goes, "Hey, do you think we'll see Junior this weekend?" I said, "They better." Talking about Junior Chualamaka. They better.
If you don't see a big dose of freshmen this weekend that are sophomores as well, some sophomores that haven't played, that is an issue. That means that this was a competitive football game. And again, this is a game where I think Marshall is a better team than some people are going to give him credit for, but also you are a better team than Marshall. Like you just are flat out a much better team. So you need to roll this one. And this is one of those games, Brian, like you get 4 games, right? You get 4 games to reserve a red shirt. This is a game where some of these kids need to play. You need to kind of see what you have. And I want to get them in a competitive environment where it's not just run punts. Like I don't want to see that. Like I want to see them let them play a little bit. Right. And for them to let them play, they need to get in a little earlier than just the last couple drives of the fourth quarter, right? So I think this is definitely a game where you need to see Notre Dame play some younger guys throughout the game, not even just at the end.
I don't want to see Tobias coming in when they're up 27-3 or something like that.
And
I want to
just
see
run
him
the ball and
series 1 or series 2 and get a shot.
Yep.
Right? That's just where it needs to be. Irish Chi-Town, Brian, do you think we'll be able to run the ball against Marshall? And is running back by committee best, or would you prefer a feature back who has 20-plus touches? Number one, just the 20-plus touch thing is just a rare thing in college football. There were really only, 2 Power 5 backs, Ryan, that consistently got 20 touches a game last year, and that was Kenny Walker and Breece Hall.
Yeah.
That's it. I've pointed this out before. When you go back and look at Georgia in 2017, in 15 games, Nick Chubb had 20 or more carries in one game, and it was 20. It was a running back by committee because it was him. It was Sonny Michel, and then they also would use DeAndre Swift that year.
Yes.
The problem Saturday was not the running backs per se. I didn't love the usage of it. I thought that you got to tailor. We've said this before. You got to tailor your run game to your backs when they're in the game. But it was too tailored on Saturday. It was like Chris Tyree's just your jet sweep guy. Audrick's just your duo ISO counter inside zone guy. Logan Diggs didn't carry it enough to really know what he is yet, how they're going to use him. But it's like you got to be able to tailor, but you still got to be able to run your stuff with all of them, and I didn't like that part of it. But running back by committee is not a problem because it was not blocking was the problem, right? If you'd have used the running backs the same exact way you did on Saturday, but the blocking was what it should have been, then we're talking about, wow, what a great 3-headed monster Notre Dame has a running back. That's the reality of it, right? And did Mayan Williams and Travion Henderson not know how to run in the first half, but then figured it out in the second half? Or was Ohio State starting to block better in the second half? Well, they were blocking better. And then those guys were, because Mayan Williams didn't start running harder in the fourth quarter. He just had more room to run. He could get going downhill more because of the blocking. And then he took advantage of it and made great runs. So that's at the end of the day, that's the thing, guys, is it's got to be about execution up front. Do that, and they're going to be fine. They'll be fine. At no point did I feel it was a back problem on Saturday.
No, that was like one of the last things I even thought about, if I'm being honest, man. Like it just like I think you mentioned it perfectly. It was a usage thing for me. Like,
right.
Because we've talked a lot. I mean, Brian, like I think that there are a couple running backs on this team that I think have a skill set that you can use them in multiple ways. And I felt like, to your point, I think it was very niche-y on Saturday, right? Like it was just like, this is the guy, this is what they want to run. Like it was like Chris Tyree, all right, we're just going to run jet sweeps. Audrick Estime, just pure downhill guy. And I'm just like, that doesn't necessarily have to be all that they are. You know what I mean? Like I just felt like it was very like putting players in a box at points, felt like to me.
Spanky has a great point. He goes, I think they legitimately thought they were going to dominate up front and didn't have a backup plan. And I think there's a lot to that.
Sure.
Because that's what you'd heard all campus. Like, man, the line's blocking really well. They're looking great. Now, one bad game doesn't mean that's gone, right? It needs to get fixed. But for me, I think there's something to that. They looked really good running the ball in fall camp. I was told that multiple times. But then you get to the game, and this is why we say, like, let me see him do it. Right? Yeah, we're hearing this, but let me see him do it. And I think Spanky's right, Ryan. I think they thought one thing was going to happen, it didn't happen, and they weren't prepared for the alternative.
Don't disagree. I think that there's a lot of layers to it, right? Like you had confidence in yourselves as far as offensive line improvements, the running back depth you have, the quarterback run ability, and then also, again, Ohio State was not a great defensive team last year. They were a much better team in game one than they were in the entirety of 2021 season. So when you couple those things together,
right,
I think Notre Dame did have maybe overconfidence. Sure. Let's call it that, I guess. But yeah, I think that they definitely had an assumption that like, hey, we're going to be able to run the football and it just
and protect the quarterback.
There. Yes,
that's the other thing. Because Ohio State was not good at putting pressure on the quarterback last year, and the stuff they were doing to get pressure, some of it was really good scheme, but not stuff that they should have been unprepared for. Ryan, I mean, you and I talked about this stuff when we did our film session last Tuesday. When we talk about like they'll bring different guys from different places, you got to be prepared for it. They'll bring the linebackers on stunts and stuff like that. We talked about that last week. So it was just bad execution. I mean, as simple as that. It was bad execution. And you're right. They didn't have because they did adjust, right? They did. This is the thing. They did adjust in the second half. They threw deeper. They took several deep shots in the second half. Now there were some other adjustments they should have made that they didn't make. I mean, bring back some levels, bring back some crossers, do some things like that. They're king on Michael Mayer a ton. So move him in motion or put him somewhere, not move him in motion. Move him in motion if you want him to get the ball, but then sit him somewhere if you want to use him as a decoy, because then they're going to overplay him and then you bang a post route over top of it or something like that. Or have him run a 10-yard option route and then run the safety over the post route and then bring like a deep, overhead drag. Well, that sounds like a great plan, but you know what? That takes time to protect, and they weren't giving him time to protect that. So there was also some limitations to some of the adjustments you could make schematically because you couldn't protect the quarterback. Right. And that was probably the most disappointing thing to me, was that, even more so than running the ball, was that. That was strange.
Yes.
Strange. Yep. All right, here we go. Here's an interesting one from Rob Thidoff. Let's say in an alternate universe on November 11th, 1993, Pete Bursich doesn't drop the INT and we beat Boston College and Nebraska in the Orange Bowl. Obviously, we have a national title, but how did the next 29 years go? I think we were asked this before the summer, Ryan. I don't think things change. I think that was going to be Lou Holtz's last great team because he had lost some coaches. He wasn't replacing them well, in my opinion. I mean, part of the reason they lost that year is because he hired Rick Minter as his defensive coordinator, and he wasn't that good of a defensive coordinator, right? That's why they gave up 41 points to Boston College. I don't think it would have changed a whole lot. I think the only thing it would have, as far as what happened next, I still think they probably, it would have maybe given them, I don't know, maybe they could have got a better D coordinator than Bob Davie, but I don't know who that would have been. I don't know if anything would have changed because, I think it still would have played out very similarly as it did. I think what would have changed is how Lou Holtz is viewed. He's already considered a great coach, but I think if he'd had 2 titles at Notre Dame, things would look a lot different, in my opinion. But as far as the outcomes, because the reality is Lou won that title while the school was fighting against the football team. That's what hurt Notre Dame. It's the school decided they didn't want Notre Dame to be great at football again. And that had happened before in the past. It's just they didn't bring in an era to replace them, those type of things. Yeah. And that's the difference. Adam Blair with
I do like those questions that are kind of like, what ifs type of stuff. Mm-hmm. Like, have you watched like they're like the Marvel shows that are like the what if this happened type of thing? So
no, I've heard about it, but I've never seen it.
Yeah. They're interesting. I kind of like those types of situations, but
yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. What if this happens? It's a good one, but I don't know if, I think the only what if I have, Ryan, is what if they would have hired Barry Alvarez instead of Bob Davie. That's the only what if that I think would have had. Like, I think George O'Leary would have been better than Ty. Sure. But it's not like he's returning them to the Lou Holtz days. Mm-hmm. He would have been a Brian Kelly type. Good, but not good enough. Right?
Right.
That's the only thing that to me would have been different. I think if they would have said, the only what if I have, again, is if Barry would have been hired instead of Bob Davie.
For 2 different sides of it too, right? Because it's like, what would Notre Dame be? But then also, what would have happened with Wisconsin?
Right. It's a good point. It's a good point. It's a really good point. Really good point. Adam Blair with a question here. Guys, do you think Notre Dame should start recruiting bigger offensive linemen and D, kind of like Bama and Georgia? I was curious because Justin Scott is a perfect fit for that. I'll push back a little bit on that. I don't think Justin Scott's a perfect fit for the Georgia and Alabama defense. I think Justin Scott's a perfect fit for a dominant defensive line no matter what you do.
Right.
I mean, he's a great player. He can play a 3-4 DN spot. He could play a nose. He could play a 3 technique and a 4 down. He's a great player. And it's not necessarily because of his size. It's his size plus athleticism combination.
Yes.
Does Notre Dame need to start recruiting bigger defensive linemen? Marcus Freeman would say yes, which is why they are doing that. So, Adam, I think you're onto something. I do think they need to get bigger up front. It's just you can't fix that in one offseason. So you look at Boubacar Traore, 6'4", 250 plus. Brennan Vernon, 6'5", already over 270 defensive ends. Devin Houston, 6'5", over 280 already. Brandon Davis Swain as a junior, 6'4", over 240, big kid. Keon Keeley, super long and twitchy. You look at the kids that they're recruiting, Elijah Rushing, great length and size. Nigel Smith.
Armel Mukum.
Armel Mukum.
Well.
That's another one. 6'3", 6'4", 250 plus pound kid with a great frame. So, Adam, I think you're onto something. I do think that they want to get bigger and longer up front while maintaining athleticism. They're not going to look like Georgia because it's a different defense. It's a different kind of defense. Georgia needs a 300-plus pounder nose tackle. Notre Dame doesn't need it. If you can get one, great, but you don't need it. But offensive line-wise, I have no problem with the size of the players they're recruiting. I mean, this incoming freshman class is going to be massive. That was a concern that I had about Jeff Quinn's recruiting. Because he was recruiting smaller, skinnier guys. I mean, Tosh Baker was always going to need to add a lot of weight. Michael Carmody was going to need to add a lot of weight. Emil Wagner is a kid that's going to need to add a lot of weight. Caleb Johnson is a kid that needed to add a lot of weight. Joe Walt's a kid that needed to add a lot of weight. Now, he had the DNA and it's worked out. But other than like Blake Fisher and maybe Rocco, Ty Chan, right? Most of the guys they've recruited need to add a lot of weight guys. Where if you look at the first class for Harry, Joe Otting's the only guy like that I can really think of. I mean, Elijah Page is already over 300 pounds. He has a much different frame. Like, he can get a lot bigger, but he's got a much different frame than Tosh Baker had from the same high school, right? Charles Jagasaw's already huge. Sullivan Abser's already huge. Sam Pendleton's already over 300 pounds. So I do think there's something to that, but I don't think they need or can recruit a bunch of 330 pounders because you just – like guys like Blake Fisher just aren't in the North a whole lot. They're just not. They're more kids. You'll find them in Texas and Louisiana and Georgia and Alabama and places like that. That's usually where you find them, North Carolina. And you're just not going to get a ton of those guys. You're going to get more of the Mike McGlincheys, the Liam Eichenbergs, and that's fine. I mean, those guys are part of great lines. Every now and then you'll get a Quentin Nelson in the North. Every now and then you'll get a Blake Fisher in the North. But more often than not, you're going to get Joe Waltz and guys like that. And that's fine. That's totally fine. Again, Notre Dame's size on the offensive line was not a reason why they struggled on Saturday. Yeah. And especially once they get Jarrett Patterson back, because he's got a little bit more beef to him than Andrew Kristofic does. But no, that's not the reason why. Defensive line-wise, though, yes, I do think they need to get bigger, yes.
Yes. Yep. Interior defensive line, there's no doubt about it, especially. But, I mean, offensive line-wise, Brian, I mean, if Jarrett Patterson plays, every one of your starters is over 308 pounds, right? 308 or bigger. And
right. Well, I mean, yeah, once Kristofic replaced Patterson, that changed because he's only 300 even. Sure. But, yes, your normal line. Like Zeke Correll's issue on Saturday was not size.
No.
It wasn't. It was he stopped his feet. And I don't care if you're 325 pounds. If you stop your feet and a guy that's 280 doesn't stop his feet, you're going to lose. You're going to lose. That's just the reality of how it goes.
No doubt about it.
All right, let's keep rolling through these. Michael S., what do the linebackers need to do to improve? You want to handle that one there, Ryan?
Yeah, sure. I think that for me, it depends what position you're talking about, right? I think that the thing that is key from linebackers in general is have to have great eye discipline. I think that was lacking at some points in the game, more from a Maris Loifau perspective. At times I thought that he just was maybe a tick slow, and he's a guy that hasn't played football in a while, right? So I expect kind of that natural maturation. From a JD Bertrand perspective, he's in a proper position. He just needs to finish plays. I mean, he does. There was too many missed tackles, especially on that 95-yard touchdown where just, you're not getting the ball carrier on the ground. So I think it's about being a little more aggressive, being a little more trusting in your eyes and your technique, and being in a proper place. Like if you trust your eyes and your trigger, post trigger, you're going to be in a good spot. And after that, it's about let's have consistent tackling technique. And I think they'll be fine. I think they'll be better than what they were on Saturday. I think there was some solid signs from the linebacker position just in general, but they definitely need to be better. There's no doubt about it. And I think that starts with trusting your technique, good eye discipline, triggering, and trusting yourselves, right? At the end of the day, if they trust themselves, I think that they'll make a lot of plays. I do think that there were times, JD and Marist both, where I think they got kind of in between trusting themselves and getting a little too far outside of their thought process. And I think that those things cost them some missed tackles, overrunning plays, underrunning plays. All those things happen when you don't trust your technique.
Next couple weeks, I want to see JT, Junior Tuihalamaka play.
Yeah.
And I want to see a little bit of Jalen Sneed. Now, it's okay if it's once the game's in doubt. I'm okay with that, with Jalen Sneed. But I want to see Jalen Sneed this weekend, and I want to see Josh Burnham this weekend. And I want to see Jordan Patel be used as a pass rusher. They need some speed up on the edge. And I was a little surprised. I thought maybe he was suspended, but he played some special teams. So that was the only personnel head scratching move from Saturday. Me saying Junior Tuihalamaka needs to play isn't they'd have beat Ohio State if he'd have played on Saturday. I get why he didn't play. That's not the matchup for Junior Tuihalamaka to thrive. It's not. Just like I don't know how much I'm playing him against USC, right? Unless it's kind of like, let him rush off the edge or something like that. It's just not the matchup for him. Maybe in the second half when it was clear Ohio State was going to run the ball, maybe it might have been good to get him in there. But moving forward, I want to see him because there are some games where that's going to be a little bit better of a matchup for him. But I want to see Jalen Sneed because they got athletes at linebacker, but that kid's really athletic, and they need to kind of force feed that one a little bit against the Marshalls and the Cals and the Syracuses and the Stanfords and the Navies. They need to force Jalen Sneed a little bit in those type of games and get him rolling. Keith Wiegand says, what do you guys think? What do you guys want to see from the offense as far as points and yards this week being an improvement? I mean, it's not so much about the points and the yards. I just want to see them be aggressive and execute and be physical. I want to just see them, I care more about yards per play. I want to see them up over 6 yards a carry, at least in this game. I want to see them averaging, 9 or more yards per pass attempt in this game on Saturday. Now, if they get even higher than that, it's even better. But again, this is a team that led their league last year in yards allowed per attempt and was second in yards allowed per completion, unless I got that backwards. They were first and second in one of those two categories. I think it was first in yards per attempt, second in yards per completion. So I want to see you go out and have some success against them in that regard, because your dudes are still better than their dudes, right? So, if they only score 40 points, it is what it is. If they score 38 points, it is what it is. I'm not going to be happy, but as long as the execution is there, the aggressiveness is there, guys are making plays, the line's playing better, I can live with that. It won't be great, but I can live with it. Now, if they score 50 plus, but we're not seeing better execution, they're just way better dudes than Marshall. That's the whole point. Is it's the points aren't going to answer this for us, right? If they score 59 points on Saturday because their defense plays great and they're just way better than Marshall and they just kind of run them over, and it doesn't necessarily tell us that they're going to be better prepared to beat North Carolina or BYU or Clemson or USC or a rematch against Ohio State. It's about the execution. It's about you use your weapons, be physical up front. I want to see guys moving their feet. Because here's the thing, holes that got destroyed against Ohio State could be 50-yard runs against Marshall if you block it the exact same way, because Marshall doesn't have Ohio State's dudes. Yeah. And that's the whole thing. It's not so much the yards and points. If we see them hitting guys and stopping their feet, but Chris Tyree is still bursting through for a 50-yard touchdown, did they really get any better? No. It's the offense is still not good. It's just your dudes are way better than their dudes. What I want to see is Zeke Correll and Josh Lugg and Andrew Kristoff and Blake Fisher and Joe Alt coming off the line, and the tight ends too, and hitting guys and then driving their feet and finishing blocks. That's what's going to say, okay, all right, they realized that they didn't do what they needed to do, and that's better. And if that only results in 40 points, okay, there's still work to be done, but they took a step, right? Hopefully it results in, we see both, a lot of points and that.
Sure.
But, part of the reason, for example, that like Western Kentucky scored a 50-plus points on Marshall last year, something they didn't give up a lot, is because they throw it a ton and they run a million plays. Notre Dame is not that kind of team.
Right.
So I don't know if they'll necessarily get there, but I'd like to see it. Sure. Certainly would like to see it.
Yeah, I'm not going to put a number on it. I think to reiterate what you said, because I agree with it 100%. I'm a film guy. I know you're a film guy, right? It's about passing the eye test, right? Like, I don't need numbers in front of me to say, like, wow, they looked a lot better today. They looked a lot crisper. The offensive line looked better. Now, the scoring and the yard totals and yards per play, all that good stuff can quantify that to what your eyes saw. But at the end of the day, I need to see good football. Like, that just all comes down to, I know it's a boring answer for some, but I need to see Notre Dame just look a lot more impressive than they did, and a lot more engaged, and a lot more focus on the technical aspects of playing their position. Those are the things that I need to see. I don't need to see a yard total specifically. I don't need to see a point total specifically. I need to see improvement, and I need to see good football on Saturday. That's all I need to see.
Right. I want to address this because I'm seeing this a lot. It's on, somebody on Twitter was like, it's disrespectful. They showed disrespect to Notre Dame by Ohio State beating them and then falling to number 3. I don't think that Ohio State falling to number 3 was anything other than a correction. What did I say this offseason? Georgia is not going to have the fall off people think. Now, Georgia's not going to be as good as they were last year, and they're not. I thought Oregon was bad on Saturday. Like, Georgia played great, Ryan, but Oregon sucked. I mean, it was both, right? But Georgia should have never been 3rd. With all due respect to Ohio State, Georgia should have been no lower than 2nd, right? And even then, I still would have put them 1. But this is a correction. Ohio State had a great win on Saturday. They beat the number 5 team in the country at home by 11. That's a great win.
Yeah.
Georgia beat the number 11 team on a neutral field in their backyard by 46 points. Right? That's a little different. And so that's what the jump was. It had nothing to do with who the only way Ohio State was going to be able to stay at 3, the way Georgia played against Oregon, was if they blew Notre Dame out. That was it. Right. But you got to think about it. Also, I think the perception is, they didn't cover the spread, right? I mean, that's dumb, but that's how some voters are. And it's also why we like to talk about the polls, but that's why I'm also glad that they don't matter at the end of the day. All right. Siggy said, Ryan, what are your thoughts on taking a toddler to a game? Meaning with travel, I have 2 toddlers and can't convince the wife it'll work.
Well, Siggy, I guess my first question would be, how are you getting to the game? Like, how far are you from Notre Dame? We drove from New Jersey to South Bend, which was about a 10-hour drive, right? So it was rough, if I'm being honest, right? Like, we stopped kind of halfway there to just kind of chill for a night, and then got there the next day. And it was, it's not fun traveling with the toddler, for being honest, right? Like, that's not too much fun. The one thing I will say is you need to try to coordinate your naps. If you do convince the wife to let you go, coordinate the naps so that hopefully she is in a good mood during the game. Because the one thing that Jules did not do a great thing for was during the spring game, Brian. Like, we took Jules out there, and she was done after about the first quarter and a half. And she's like, all right, I need to walk around and I need to leave this game. And we ended up leaving the game a little bit earlier for the spring game, which, it's just a spring game, so not a big deal. But she did a great job, in my opinion. Juliet's on kind of chilling, walking around a little bit, doing some good stuff, but it is definitely get some snacks, get some rest, try to time up the nap. That's the biggest thing for me, is trying to time up the nap, because you don't want to deal with a grumpy toddler during a important football game. So,
no doubt.
Yeah.
No doubt. All right, last few before we get out of here. Ed said 3. Brian, I honestly thought you wrote the episode of SEC Shorts. They were in my head, Ed.
I
did not write it. They were so in my head. I'm like, dude, this is everything I've been saying. It took them 1 game to figure it out. 1 game to figure it out, Ryan.
I really did think you wrote it when they were talking about, like, it's all the players' fault. It's not my fault at all, or whatever it was.
Right.
It was so funny. So
yes. Funny. Oh my gosh. That was classic stuff. Ryan, I was weak. It's like, are you sure this is okay? Our wide receiver was trash. And he's like, are you sure this is okay? He's like, he's got a $2,000 NIL deal with Raising Cane's or something. He'll be fine. Oh, it was so great. So great. So absolutely great. It was so classic. I enjoyed it thoroughly. And of course, all the LSU fans are all in their feelings and responses. Like same people, I saw the same people responding on Twitter to them as this was poorly done. And just because something's making fun of you doesn't make it poorly done. I've seen them crack jokes on Notre Dame in the past where it was kind of funny. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, okay, I don't agree with it, but it's funny. Like, lighten up. If that made you mad, then you're the problem. Lighten the heck up. This is kind of what they do. Did you see the one where they had Utah and Oregon's coaches going from the future? So like they went, you know, that when they lose a game, the guys are all beat up and bandaged. So they had their coaches go back into the future to the pregame speech to try to like tell them to like, you know, what was going to happen. It was hilarious. It was really funny. It was really funny,
man.
I like the report cards. Have you ever seen the ones where they do like report cards? Oh, it's really fun.
I don't think so.
If you haven't watched them, you should. The best ones they ever did, though, and I'll still say this, is during COVID, when it was the ACC and the SEC were going to play. Those two skits were just classic. And then like the Pac-12 is like this nerd that just follows the Big Ten around. The Big Ten was like this somewhat like attractive lady. You know what I mean? Like they were trying to make her like, you know, I think I'm hot stuff. You know, the way she carried herself, like she's like thinks she's hot stuff. That's how the Big Ten carries itself. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I thought how the character they picked for that and how she conducted herself was like perfect in explaining the Big Ten. You know what I mean? And then the Pac-12 is like this tall, nerdy looking guy that like can't kick a football. And like, we'll take you, but we're not taking him. She's like, that's fine. You know, just leave him behind. It was so great.
That's awesome.
It was so great. I think those things are just incredibly well done.
Yeah. Incredibly that and what's his Joey from Barstool?
Molinaro. Yeah. The one he did with Brian Kelly.
Saban and Kelly. Yeah.
Brian, how the hell did you get on this call? It was so great. Because he's arguing with Jimbo Fisher. Yeah. And then he's a Jimbo super high pitch talking to me miles an hour. And then Brian Kelly, you know, gets on there with his little Savannah accent. And he's just like, oh, it's so good. Brian, how the hell did you get on this call? All right. It was so good. So good. Oh my goodness gracious! That was.
I might have to go watch that after this is over.
Oh yeah, have you seen it, or are you just like watching it again?
I've seen it a million times.
Yeah, go watch some of the SEC Shorts ones. Those are really really good. They're really well done. Really well done, and they have like different actors and actresses all the time. Like go watch the one from when Georgia lost to South Carolina in 2019. It was so good. It was really good. Like every time they're going to show highlights, he's like changing the channel. He's like cutting the cord because he's trying to make his girlfriend's the college football playoff. And he's wearing a Jordan. Then at the end, this lady shows up with like condolences flowers, and then she turns around and realizes what happened, and she's like screams really loudly. It was just really funny. It was hilarious. Very well done. Anyway, that is going to do it for today's show, everybody. Thank you all so much for everything today. Being with us, great crowd today. Before you leave, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. And of course, if you're listening via podcast, give us a 5-star review, sign up for the message boards. We have a lot going on. Just because Notre Dame lost does not mean we are slowing down. We're going to keep going. Notre Dame's going to keep going. And we're going to have a lot of great content for you tonight. We will not have a show tonight because Sean Stiers is out and Vince isn't able to do the show. So there will be no IB Nation Sports Talk tonight, but they'll be back tomorrow as well. On Wednesday, and then we'll have a show on Thursday as well. So everybody have a great rest of your night. We will talk to you again very soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.